Chapter 1121. In just 2 to 3 minutes, hundreds of soldiers equipped with the most advanced exoskeletons were reduced to a pile of broken limbs. Blood flowed like rivers and seas, and flesh and blood were everywhere. The Empress threw a few armed helicopters to the ground and landed with Renbachin in her hand. These conventional weapons were like children to the Empress. An Empress had the bearing of an Empress. She didn't need to do anything in a small-scale battle like this. Qin Chuan and the others could easily destroy these weapons. However, the Empress had been suppressing her anger. She was actually injured by an ordinary person in this world. If she hadn't reacted quickly, Renbachin would have died without a doubt. Even though the Empress had been suppressing her anger, she was still in a rage. The Empress wanted to vent her anger, but killing the culprit wasn't the end of it. How could one person's death be enough? She wanted to destroy everything that the other party had. It was just like how some people liked to smash things when they quarreled. The Empress was the same, but she liked to smash other people's things. After landing from the sky, the Empress's expression didn't ease but became even colder. Qin Chuan and the others waved their weapons to get rid of the flesh and blood stuck to them. Except for Lian Liang, the huge mace in his hand was stained with pieces of flesh that needed to be carefully cleaned. However, he didn't care. In his opinion, the mace covered in flesh and blood was more intimidating and could better serve as a foil for his bravery. Where should we go next? The Empress looked at Feng Shuo and said, "Show us the way." Feng Shuo, who was stunned by everyone's destructive power, immediately quivered when he was glanced at by this cold and murderous gaze. He subconsciously asked, "Where are we going?" "Manhattan." He replied. Oh, I got it. Let's go forward first." Feng Shuo looked distracted. A United States mecha regiment was destroyed just like that. Just as the Empress was about to move forward, she suddenly looked up at the sky. What's up there? In this night, even with the moonlight, one couldn't see very far, let alone the sky. After recovering from the shock, everyone in the battle command became frantic. Countless staff officers were busy analyzing the enemy's strength and formulating new battle plans. "Minister, the satellites are in place, and the 86 laser cannons have finished charging. Should we attack?" A man with a general rank asked in a deep voice. The defense minister fell silent for a moment. He had originally planned to use space-based weapons to attack while the mechanical army was entangled with the enemy, catching the enemy off guard and killing them as much as possible. However, the enemy was advancing too quickly, and the mechanical army was also failing too quickly. The space-based weapons had only finished charging at this time, and the threat of using space-based weapons alone was not great. The biggest problem with space-based weapons was that the position of each laser cannon was slightly different. Therefore, the angle of the satellite had to be slightly adjusted after each laser beam was fired. At the same time, they had to calculate the influence of the environment and the atmosphere on the refraction of the laser beam. All of this would take at least a minute. In outer space, a deviation of 1 millimeter would cause the attack to miss by at least a few hundred meters. The enemy was not a wooden dummy. With his speed, he would only be able to attack once. The Minister of Defense hesitated whether to attack now or to give up this opportunity. If they didn't stop them, the enemy would go straight into the densely populated areas, and with the combat strength they had displayed, the destruction they would cause would be completely unbearable. However, the attack could only hit one person. Even if one person was killed, the rest would retaliate crazily. The most important thing was that the enemy was in the heart of their side. He raised his head and looked at the few figures on the screen. His gaze landed on the bald man and the woman in red whose bodies seemed to be glowing. From the information he had received, the bald man's identity was very special. And the woman in red was the strongest. "What are the chances of killing target number 1? The defense minister asked in a deep voice. "No one can hide from light. According to calculations, there is a 90% chance of killing target number 1. Everyone, after today, we may become the sinners of the entire country, the defense minister said in a deep voice. The command center instantly quieted down. The enemy is very strong, just like the superheroes in Marvel and DC Comics. The pressure they bring us is unprecedented. However, this is not a reason to let them do whatever they want on our territory. Even if it will incur crazy retaliation, even if it will cause us to be condemned in the future, no matter what the reason is, surrounding the territory of the United States is the duty of us soldiers. Attack, target number 1. Yes, sir. Everyone replied in unison. The defense minister sat in his seat with a serious expression. In reality, he was not as fearless as he appeared to be. To put it bluntly, he was more of a politician than a soldier. If he had a choice, he would definitely persuade the president to give up on that plan. However, he did not have a choice. He had a feeling that no matter what happened in the end, he was going to be in big trouble. Angle, in position. SWK-01. Launch. As a beam of light shot into the sky from a certain corner of the United States, everyone saw the woman in red suddenly raise her head and look up. What is she looking at? Everyone instantly felt as if the other party had discovered them and was looking at them through a satellite. She noticed. This thought only appeared in everyone's mind when a beam of light shot down from the sky and hit the woman in red. Target hit. She actually dodged it. How is that possible? There's no way someone can dodge light. She noticed it. She moved when the beam of light rebounded, but she's too fast. Everyone in the command center had pale faces. She even dodged light. Even at the moment when the beam was refracted, she noticed it. She didn't completely dodge it. Her arm is injured. An injured beast was even scarier. So was the Empress. A few seconds ago, the Empress suddenly felt a huge threat coming from the sky. Then, a beam of light fell on the spot where the Empress had just been standing. There weren't any lighting effects, and there wasn't much of a technological feel to it. It was as if someone had suddenly turned on a laser light and shone it in this direction. There was a 10-centimeter diameter mark on the ground that was almost completely melted. Renbachien even smelled the smell of barbecued meat. Then, there was a wanton and ostentatious killing intent. Even though it wasn't directed at everyone present, it landed squarely on them as if countless sharp blades were slashing across their bodies. The clothes of Qin Chuan and the others were already slightly damaged, and at this moment, tiny holes silently appeared on them. Feng Shuo was the most miserable. He couldn't help but groan as he felt as if countless knives were slashing his body. Your Majesty! Renbachien was also shocked. He grabbed the Empress's arm and took a closer look. There was a charcoal-like area from the elbow down, giving off the smell of burnt barbecued meat. This is a laser cannon. Renbachien felt his heart ache even though the Empress's arm was injured. It's all thanks to your Majesty's quick reaction. I want them to die. The Empress said through gritted teeth. There was nothing wrong with using any means in a battle between two armies. The Empress originally didn't want them to live, but she was even more furious now. Lin Chaola swallowed her saliva as if she was drooling. Thump. The Empress appeared where Lin Chaola was, but Lin Chaola was nowhere to be seen. Renbachien felt that it was a light punishment for her to take a beating. Even Erhua was smarter than you. Set a small target first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 11:22. TSK, this is Gotham City, Renbachien and the others exclaimed as they moved quickly in the shadows. A few decades ago, when Renbachien was still a student and had just started working, Citigroup was the world's most powerful country. Gotham City was one of the world's economic centers, and it was still the case even now. If you loved someone, send him to Gotham City because it was a paradise where you could enjoy yourself to the fullest. If you hated someone, send him to Gotham because it was hell and experience the misery of the slums. Renbochin remembered someone saying something like this before, but he didn't know who said it. However, this statement showed the importance of this place in many people's hearts. Now that he had seen it with his own eyes, to be honest, the cleanliness of this city couldn't be compared to many small cities in China. From time to time, trash cans could be seen on the ground, as if they had just been rummaged through. Patches could be seen everywhere on the ground, as well as broken road teeth. All of this told him that this city wasn't what many people imagined it to be. There were indeed a lot of tall buildings, and the distance between them was extremely small. If one wanted to bask in the sun, they would have to wait until noon. However, this environment made it difficult for satellites to aim at them. Along the way, they didn't encounter any obstructions. They probably knew that they couldn't stop them, so they had other ideas. They had settled down, but the Empress wasn't. Every time she took a step, her strength would travel from the soles of her feet to the ground and spread out. It was like a stone smashing into the water, creating circles of ripples. The result was the same as what happened in Fog City. It was like an earth dragon rolling under the ground, waking up countless people. Rest for a while and herd the goats tomorrow. Renbochin comforted the Empress. This was his plan before he came. The Empress was like an angry hedgehog that could explode at any moment. Renbochin could only comfort her with a few words. Herd goats. Qin Chuan and the others were puzzled. They didn't dare to talk to the furious Empress, but it wasn't a problem to ask Renbochin. Just like herding four-corned cows. Renbochin rolled his eyes. After all, there were only a few of them. Even though they were experts, could they kill everyone in a city with a population of more than 10 million? Furthermore, Renbochin wasn't prepared to cause such a large massacre. He wanted to cause a scene for revenge. However, there was no need to slaughter the civilians. Just let them go free, just like those ranches' flocks of sheep needed to be herded. Along with a few shepherd dogs, Qin Chuan and his group were shepherd dogs. Driving half of New York citizens to wherever they wanted like sheep was actually quite a thrilling thing to think about. Actually, everyone didn't really need to rest. Putting the others aside, Renbochin could go 2 or 3 days without any problems if he needed to. However, waking up the entire city in the middle of the night and torturing the people of Gotham City was not a very ethical thing to do. In addition, too many people were sleeping. If they were to fight now, there would be too many casualties. Renbochin had always firmly believed that he was a pretty good person. Other than himself, he had never seen anyone who was so considerate of the enemy. On his way to Manhattan, he could see many helicopters leaving in a hurry from the rooftops. Many rich people probably ran away after getting the news. After all, Citibank belonged to the rich. These rich people were naturally the first to receive the news. Of course, they were the wealthiest. Now the president and his cabinet are still struggling to tell the people of New York to evacuate, which would obviously cause chaos. In particular, if a country couldn't protect its own people under the hands of 10 people, one could imagine what would happen to them. However, if they didn't inform the people to evacuate, there would obviously be more serious consequences. No matter what, this president and his cabinet wouldn't have a good ending. Let's find a place first, Renbochin instructed. After Renbochin instructed, Feng Shuo took the opportunity to lead everyone to a high-rise area in the Upper East District. This is the gathering place of the rich in Gotham City. Many of those rich people on Wall Street have mansions here. The Citibank government definitely wouldn't dare to cause any trouble here. Feng Shuo said to Renbochin. Renbochin smiled and didn't say much. Even a cornered dog would jump over a wall, let alone a country's government. Under normal circumstances, the Citibank naturally wouldn't dare to cause any trouble here. However, compared to the destruction of Gotham City, this place was nothing. They randomly found a building in the middle of the building, tore down the door, and knocked out the owner. Renbochin went to the bar and found a few bottles of wine. He poured a glass for the Empress and threw 2 bottles to Qin Chuan and the rest. Take a rest and wait for tomorrow morning. TSK, it's not that good. It's not as good as your wine. Qin Chuan took a sip and smacked his lips. The wine that Renbochin brewed during the gamble with the Zhang family was really memorable for a few days. Unfortunately, Renbochin didn't brew any more after that. Of course, even if he did, it wouldn't be his turn. With the Empress's alcohol tolerance, a few tons of wine a year was only enough for her to drink. The Zhang family brewed another batch of wine. I will process it later and share some with you. Renbochin shook his head slightly. He didn't think much about wine and mostly drank with the Empress. He contacted Yang Sen from the Messier 87 department. It was early in the morning here, which was afternoon in China. The timing was just right. Mr. Ren, you have created a big commotion. Yang Sen couldn't help but exclaim after the call. Renbochin and the others were in Gotham City, and countless people in China were paying attention. The previous battle was practically a live broadcast. Many of those who were tempted to cause trouble were now well behaved. They really couldn't afford to offend them. Fortunately, that person from above suppressed them. Otherwise, Renbochin would have dealt with them when he returned. Is there anything I can help with? Yang Sen asked. Of course, the nation definitely wouldn't get involved on the surface and would even pretend that they didn't know anything. I'm suddenly blind, and you guys can do whatever you want. Make a few pieces of armor, weapons, and food, Renbochin said. Although there were only 10 people, the amount of food consumed in a day was definitely not a small amount. It was easily more than 5,000 kilograms. With such a large amount of food, even if they could obtain it through various means, a lot of it would definitely be done by others. As a country, they had the ability to do so. I don't want compressed food. Renbochin said first and then told him the quantity. I will help you contact them and try to arrange it, but it may not meet your requirements. After all, this isn't in China. Now that the matter has become so big, countless people are watching you, and it's very difficult for us to do it. Yang Sen was a little embarrassed, but he still agreed. As for the weapons and armor, are they cold weapons? Yang Sen guessed. In the battle just now, those people wielded knives like meat grinders. They probably wouldn't be interested in ordinary firearms. Of course, the weight doesn't matter as long as it can protect the vital parts and doesn't affect the movement of the joints. I want the best metal that can at least withstand the laser for a short period of time. Renbochin felt that although the power of the laser wasn't small, the attack frequency was its biggest weakness. As long as there was armor that could withstand it for a short period of time, it wouldn't pose too much of a threat. He then asked Qin Chuan and the others about their requirements and reported the measurements and requirements. It needs to be sent to the Maple Leaf Kingdom first before being transported to the United States. It will probably be delivered to you in 36 hours. They didn't rest until dawn. First, a hypnotic gas appeared out of nowhere, causing Qin Chuan and the others to yawn several times. Then, a missile streaked across the darkness of dawn and burst into flames in the night. The Americans are crazy. Feng Shuo, who was dragged to the ground and woken up by a bottle of water, broke out in a cold sweat. This was the Upper East Side of Manhattan, the gathering place of the rich in Gotham City. The Americans even blew themselves up. They would be crazy if they didn't do anything. Renbochin smiled. He was already prepared for this. He then stretched his back and said, I originally wanted to give them some time, but since they are so impatient, let's start herding the sheep. End of the cell phone. Mi no advertising allowed 81 Zongwangxiashowang. Chapter 1123. Feng Shuo thought the Americans were crazy. The U.S. Secretary of Defense also felt like he was going crazy. They were afraid to take action, but they had no choice but to do so. This was the true portrayal of their current situation. Manhattan, the economic and cultural center of Citigroup, where most of the world's top 500 companies were headquartered, was also home to the largest number of wealthy people in the country. Although some had left last night, this was only a small portion of the top tycoons. Most of the people were still here. Ren Baqian, the Empress, and the rest felt as if they were stabbing into the hearts of their enemies, causing them to be in so much pain that they wished they were dead. If a disaster were to happen here, the entire economy of Citibank would be hit hard. If it were another person or organization, the United States could still think of a way to resolve the situation and minimize their losses to an acceptable range. The Empress was different. She was a walking killing machine. The Americans knew that she could destroy a region or even a city by herself. She was an extremely terrifying force. It had powerful destructive power, superb speed, and an unbearable sense of danger. It was too difficult to kill such a person, especially when the person was in his heart. Even if they did everything they could to kill the other party, they would most likely end up half dead. This was no longer a case of sacrificing 800 to kill 1,000. In the eyes of some of the higher-ups of the United States Army, this was already a case of sacrificing 80,000 to kill 1,000. However, they didn't have a choice. They had to do something. No matter what they did, it couldn't be worse than what they were doing now. The hypnotic gas and missiles had all been used, but there was almost no effect. The other party actually didn't suffer any damage at all. This made the hearts of those who were waiting for the result go cold. In that case, all sorts of tricks were prepared to be used next. Before that, a few men in black suits appeared in his line of sight. "Gentlemen, perhaps we can talk." Ren Baqian grinned. Such a familiar smell, such familiar words, and even the clothes were so familiar. They just bombed us with missiles, and now they're here to negotiate. Were you born in the year of the dog? However, before Ren Baqian could open his mouth, Lian Liang had already appeared in front of them with an evil grin on his face. With a slap, only a few headless corpses were left. Towards their enemies, Qin Chuan, Lian Liang and the rest never spoke any nonsense. Don't you have the slightest bit of respect for life? An image suddenly appeared in the air. It was one of their targets. Life? Reverence? Isn't it ridiculous? Why didn't you say anything when you cooperated with the Rising Sun City to set a trap? Why weren't you in awe when you blew up the plane? Now you're thinking of reverence. Ren Baqian felt like laughing. However, it was true that the Aboriginals did not have much reverence for life. To the Aboriginals who had been fighting ferocious beasts in the wilderness for thousands of years, that was a joke. They could even disregard their own lives at any time, so why would they care about the lives of others? We will meet again very soon. At that time, we will discuss this issue again. Ren Baqian flashed his white teeth at the other party and crushed the communication device on the ground. This thing is much more advanced than the telephone. Qin Chuan smacked his lips. The cars here were also much more advanced than those in Dayo. There were also advanced things like big screens on the streets. The few of them finally understood why the newly built imperial capital felt a little strange. It turned out that it was like this place. Your Majesty, do it, Ren Baqian said. You guys will start from the coastal area in the northeast. Feng Shuo will lead the way. Ren Baqian said to Qin Chuan and the rest. Remember what I told you to be careful of. If you die here, it will be a joke. Even a fool wouldn't be bitten by an ant. Qin Chuan laughed. Before he could finish laughing, he was smashed into a building not far away. The Empress was the fool who got bitten by an ant. She was worse than a fool. Enchanting, go to, Rinpoche said. I don't need protection. Enchanting looked at the Empress, took the bow from her back, and handed it to Rinpoche along with the quiver. Then, she cupped her hands and left. Follow me. Wait a minute. Rinpoche's expression suddenly changed. The Empress looked at him doubtfully. I seem to have forgotten something. Rinpoche knocked his head as if he had forgotten something important. What exactly was it? Rinpoche was deep in thought. The Empress glanced at the top of a building in the distance where someone was looking at her. Rinpoche's expression changed as he looked at the place where the others had disappeared. Is someone missing? It seemed like she found a room to sleep after the phone call. When the missile exploded, everyone jumped down in advance. Why didn't anyone call for her? The main reason was that her presence was too low. All she did was sleep every day. Rinpoche didn't remember her existence until now. The Empress looked at Rinpoche, then looked at the half-destroyed building and the survivors who were running out of it. After thinking about it carefully, someone was indeed missing. I'll go and look for her. Rinpoche moved closer in a flash, stepped on the outer wall, and jumped onto it. However, it was easier to find a foothold in such a ruined building than an ordinary building. According to his memory, all 5 floors were in ruins. 2 of the floors had turned into big holes, and the original room was nowhere to be seen. According to the position, only a pile of broken concrete was left in the corner of the broken wall. It was very likely that Lin Chaola was under this pile of concrete. Rinpoche's heart tightened. He didn't know if Lin Chaola could survive under such circumstances. He moved away a few huge concrete slabs and shouted, Lin Chaola, are you alive? I'm below. Her voice was a little weak as if she was injured. Rinpoche was glad that such a big explosion had turned several floors into ruins. It was lucky that Lin Chaola wasn't dead. It would be too unjust for her to die here. After some time, he finally dug out Lin Chaola, who was like a clay figurine. Rinpoche was slightly stunned to see that the person in front of him wasn't the Lin Chaola of the past. She had round ears on her head, and her face seemed to have grown a little. Most importantly, the clothes on her upper body were all torn to pieces, revealing her 2 trembling breasts. This was completely incomparable to her in the past. He had seen this body long ago. He had seen it on a flat board, after her transformation, and even tied her up. He had touched everything that shouldn't be touched, so there was nothing strange about it. What was strange was that she actually transformed. Back then, she transformed after eating the herdsman's jade-wasted slave and naturally transformed back after a period of time. Now, she actually transformed again in a crisis. Lin Chaola didn't care about her exposure. She teared up after being dug out and said, my leg was crushed and broken. Serves you right for sleeping. Seeing that she wasn't dead, Rinpoche began to resent her for failing to meet his expectations. You slept every day, and now you were blown up. Woo, Lin Chaola's tears trickled down. She wiped her face, and it became even more disheveled. She felt wronged. Who would have thought that she would be blown up like this while sleeping? Rinpoche cleared out a large piece of cement that was pressing down on her leg. There weren't many injuries on her upper body, but one of her legs was penetrated by a steel bar. The other leg was twisted and obviously fractured. Other than these 2 major injuries, there weren't any scratches. Lin Chaola's skin was also very tough. The Empress landed silently behind Rinpoche and sighed as she looked at the somewhat miserable Lin Chaola, who was crying even more miserably. Did you bring medicine? Yes, but I have to wash her first. Rinpoche carried the petite and almost naked Lin Chaola on his shoulder. The Empress snorted and glanced at Lin Chaola's hot body. Even the dust couldn't hide it. Chapter 11:24. When he carried Lin Chaola to an empty room to take a bath, she transformed back to her original size. After the bath, she was back to that girl with no breasts and no buttocks. After treating her wounds, he found some clothes for her to wear, denim shorts, a sports vest, and a t-shirt with a husky drawn on it. It was Lin Chaola's best friend. In fact, she fell into a deep sleep after the bath, and Renbaqian was the one who gave her the clothes. Transforming under such a huge threat consumed too much of her energy, and she needed to fall asleep to recover her strength. Not only did the team lose members, but she also became a burden. Renbaqian had no choice but to tie her behind him. When he went down, it was already a mess outside. Fleeing people and vehicles were everywhere, like a nest of ants scattering in all directions. In the surroundings, 3 buildings had already collapsed, and a few buildings were full of cracks as if they would collapse at any time. The Empress, dressed in red, stood there like a reef in the middle of the waves. The chaotic crowd automatically parted when they got close to her. "Let's go." The Empress took a glance at Renbaqian and casually threw the bow into his arms. Then, she got up and walked in another direction. There were several melted holes around her body, and they were the same as the marks caused by the laser beam that fell from the sky last night. In addition, there were also many long bullets on the ground. Following the Empress's footsteps, a 20 to 30-story building began to collapse in the opposite direction, smashing into the chaotic crowd from the middle. The collapsed concrete blocks crashed into the crowd, creating waves of blood. Cries and screams could be heard all around. Renbaqian looked at the chaos around him and walked behind the Empress. "It doesn't start from here." In the plan, he and the Empress would form one group, and the rest would form another. They would start from the 2 corners of Gotham City and destroy the crowd toward the Hua residence. It was just like herding sheep. These people could cause the greatest damage to the Hua residence. They were also their hostages. The Empress's footsteps landed heavily on the ground, causing the ground to tremble. She turned her head and looked at Renbaqian with bloodshot eyes. "I want to destroy something. I want to bring destruction to my enemies. I want to make them tremble when they think of me. I want to make them feel fear when they see me. I want to make them not dare to look me in the face or call me by my name." There seemed to be a ball of flame in her voice. The Empress opened her arms as if she was embracing the world and then shattering it. Renbaqian's heart skipped a beat as he looked at the Empress. Recently, the volcano that had been buried in her body had erupted. Was it because Lin Chaola was injured? In other words, the repeated attacks on the Empress caused her anger to accumulate and accumulate. It was only when he dug Lin Chaola out that her anger exploded. Furthermore, the traces left behind by the laser and sniper rifle around the Empress just now were undeniable. The American government had done a great job, causing the Empress's anger to completely erupt. At this moment, the Empress was in grave danger. It was even more dangerous than before. A woman who liked to smash things when she was angry, and she had the strength to massacre an entire city by herself. The combination of these two was simply world-destroying. Following the tremors and rumbles, another building began to topple and collapse, smashing into the crowd like a raging river. Renbaqian noticed that these 2 buildings had collapsed in the direction of the crowd. In other words, the Empress had broken the load-bearing walls and pillars of these 2 buildings that were facing the crowd. "Start a massacre. Your Majesty." Looking at the chaos around him, Renbaqian couldn't help but grab the Empress's wrist. "Are you trying to stop me?" The Empress turned her head, her eyes glowing red and full of ferocity. "I want to say that your Majesty looks so beautiful now." Renbaqian looked straight into her eyes and caressed her face with one hand. It felt like warm jade, soft and exquisite. The Empress paused for a moment, and the red glow in her eyes diminished a lot. The person I love is an unparalleled emperor. There's no need to believe it. This is an unquestionable fact, Renbochin said softly. The red glow in the Empress's eyes diminished a little, and her original black pupils began to show. I would like to ask for permission. I really can't help but kiss your majesty now. Renbochin hugged the Empress's waist and smelled her fragrance. The red glow in the Empress's eyes diminished again. Renbochin leaned forward slightly and kissed her. He felt the heart-stirring softness, licked her red lips, and shouted, I will never let go of you in this lifetime. The Empress's eyes were completely restored to their original clarity. The Ministry of National Defense, who had been observing the two of them with satellites and surveillance cameras, as well as some people who were watching this scene through other channels, were dumbfounded. What was going on? Was this a public display of affection on the battlefield? Renbochin was proud of himself. He was indeed the best. The Empress wouldn't behave like this in the past, even in battle. She would only behave like this when she was completely enraged. She was like a ferocious beast that was too dangerous. She was like a sharp blade that hurt others and herself. Then, a bullet hit the Empress's head, deformed, bounced off, and a strand of her hair fell. In the blink of an eye, the Empress's eyes emitted a red glow. While bouncing off Renbochin, a longbow and a bone arrow appeared in her hands. The air was torn like silk, and a white line appeared after it was torn. The sniper on the distant building exploded into a mist of blood. The building in front of them began to collapse, and a black shadow directly covered their heads. Damn it! Renbochin was furious. He was using his ultimate move to reduce the Empress's anger, but the two of them were increasing the Empress's anger. Even the heavens wouldn't forgive them if they didn't die. Although he was angry, escaping was more important. He reached out to grab the Empress, but the Empress grabbed him by the collar and knocked him into the crowd. She knocked a bloody path out of the crowd. There was absolutely no need for the Empress to do this. She would never do this under normal circumstances. The Empress's favorite activity was to step on people's heads. However, at this moment, the Empress only wanted to tear everything in front of her to shreds. She brutally knocked through the crowd and past the collapsed building in front of her. The ground that she ran past was completely shattered, and her power unscrupulously penetrated through her feet to the surroundings without any restraint. Groups of people were blown to pieces as if a bomb had gone off in their bodies. Renbochin was thrown to the ground 2 streets away by the Empress. It was as if his body had fallen apart. Just now, the Empress had knocked over at least 7 or 8 cars while carrying him. If he didn't have a meat shield, he reckoned that a few of his bones would have been broken. After getting up from the ground, Renbochin hurriedly put down Lin Chaola, who was on his back, and saw her spurting out small amounts of blood like a fountain. At this moment, she wasn't in a deep sleep, but had fainted. The Empress panted heavily. It wasn't because she was tired, but because the red color in her eyes was fluctuating, bright and dark. Purple veins floated and dissipated on the surface of her body repeatedly. Renbochin couldn't care less about the Empress. He quickly checked Lin Chaola's physical condition and reckoned that she had at least a few broken bones. Chapter 11:25. In the end, I was shocked by the explosion. Luckily, I'm on a higher floor. Anyway, there was no electricity. Everyone knows the rest. The female Empress Gigolo, the electric pole downstairs exploded. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 11:26. How is she? Renbochin was standing in a room. The window in front of him was completely smashed. He was on the 4th floor, and he could see the flesh and blood all over the ground and the red figure in the distance. Beside him, a blonde lady in her 40s was examining Lin Chaola. Her back is fractured in 3 places, and her lumbar vertebrae should be fractured. Was she hit by a car? The blonde lady suppressed her anger. She was giving first aid just now, but she was kidnapped by this Asian man and forced to treat this young girl first. Not only her, but her son, who was 7 or 8 years old, was also injured. Although she was furious, she didn't say anything for the sake of her son's safety. These Asians were far stronger than the Americans, but apart from videos, it was rare to see the truly powerful Asians in the United States. However, she didn't hide her anger at all. Is her life in danger? Ren Bachien turned his head and asked. Lin Chaola wasn't hit by a car, but by someone else. However, the effect was more serious than being hit by a car. Even if she was hit by a car, she wouldn't be able to bear it. Previously, there was chaos everywhere, and the car wasn't as fast as her legs. At that time, the Empress's speed was faster than the speed of sound, and she could directly turn people into a rain of blood. You need to take her to the hospital, but not the hospital in Gotham City. Somewhere else. Gotham City is very dangerous now, and the president has issued a statement to evacuate the civilians temporarily. The blonde lady was a doctor after all, and she reminded Ren Bachien. Unfortunately, she didn't expect that the crisis in Gotham City was brought about by this person in front of her. She didn't see what happened after she was kidnapped, but she was puzzled as to why the noise outside was so much lesser and even quieter. The position of her bones is not off, right? Ren Bachien asked. No, the blonde lady replied. Well, I'll give you a suggestion. It's best to stay in the ruins. It's much safer than running around, Ren Bachien said casually. Just now, this woman actually stopped to give first aid to a passerby in such a chaotic situation. He had to admit that she was a good person. The lady glared at him, held her son, and ran downstairs. However, as soon as she went out, her legs gave way, and she sat on the ground. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with fear. She saw countless broken corpses on the street outside. Not even a complete corpse could be seen. The wreckage covered the road. Previously, there had been countless civilians fleeing on this road, but now, those people had become corpses. It was as if a bomb had exploded from the inside, and the ground was covered in flesh and blood. Ugh! The woman quickly buried her son's face in her chest. She could no longer endure the turbulence in her body and directly vomited. Even if he was a doctor, the scene in front of him was too terrifying. It was like hell on earth. He took out some ointment from the pouch at his waist and applied it on Lin Chaola. Her back was fractured in 3 places, and her hip bone was also fractured. Then, he fed her the medicine. He dipped his finger into her mouth and poured a few mouthfuls of water. Being sick for a long time made one a doctor. His movements of applying medicine and feeding medicine were very agile. At this level, he could at least be considered as half an orthopedic surgeon. He knew very well that even if he used medicine, it would take him 3 days to recover from this injury. Lin Chaola's bloodline was special. She might be able to recover faster than him, but it would only be half a day faster. Fortunately, even though it would take 2.5 days for her to recover, she would be able to walk on her own in 1 day and move around in another and a half days. He tied Lin Chaola behind him again and jumped out of the window. The street was like a sea of blood. Ren Bachien swept his gaze across and saw the golden-haired female doctor. However, her condition wasn't right. It was as if an invisible rope was strangling her neck, and she had difficulty breathing. Asthma. This thought flashed across Ren Bachien's mind. He saw the child in her arms fall to one side and in the same state as her. Both of them were also violently convulsing. Damn, it's poisonous gas. Ren Bachien immediately reacted. He was too familiar with this thing. It was colorless, odorless, and extremely difficult to detect. Even an earth will expert could only last 2 minutes longer than an ordinary person. If it weren't for the two ordinary people here, the situation would have been quite serious by the time he realized it. Renbachien held his breath. Even though he could also inhale it through his skin, the speed was much slower. He stomped his feet and turned into a shadow. After a few steps, he landed beside the Empress and grabbed her with one hand. "Your Majesty, there's poisonous gas here. Let's go." The Empress had massacred an entire street. Her anger had dissipated a lot, and she was much more clear-headed now. She pulled Renbachien into the air and landed on the top of a building in the distance. Below them was a surging crowd of refugees. With them around, any poisonous gas could be detected in time. Renbachien tried to contact Feng Shuo, but no one answered after half a minute. Renbachien knew that the other group was probably in a similar situation as him and had also encountered poisonous gas. Feng Shuo probably couldn't escape the fate of death, but the others should be able to react after discovering that he was poisoned. Renbachien had instructed them on the road and when he was resting yesterday. Besides some weapons that he knew, it also included poisonous gas. After all, this thing couldn't be avoided. Don't be in a hurry to kill people. Renbachien saw that the Empress was about to make a move. He reached out to hold her hand and intertwined his fingers. "The President of the United States has just issued a wartime order to mobilize the people of Gotham City to leave," Renbachien said. "The streets are full of people now. When they gather together, we can drive them away from the rear." Renbachien pressed on his communication device and played the video of the president's speech. Renbachien took a few glances and laughed. "They don't dare to not mobilize the people of the city. Both sides fought in Gotham City, causing countless deaths and injuries. Now that the people of the city are moving, we will follow them and turn the United States upside down like a wildfire spreading. They can't do anything even if they know. They just have to be careful not to fall for their tricks. Unless they drop nuclear bombs on their own land and on their own people. Otherwise, they can only watch helplessly." The Empress stood at the edge of the rooftop and looked down at the crowd. Her eyes were still flickering with a dark red color, and it seemed like she wanted to go down and kill again. Renbachien's gaze was also changing as he stood behind the Empress. He was prepared to set off a reign of terror in the United States, but he wasn't prepared to let the high-ranking officials off either. However, he hadn't considered whether to start a massacre or a massacre. Given the density of the crowd below and the Empress's indiscriminate attacks within a radius of a few hundred meters, it wasn't impossible to kill hundreds of thousands of people. Previously, the Empress had killed at least thousands of people on the streets. Including Qin Chuan and the others, who didn't know the current situation, it was estimated to be tens of thousands. It was completely possible for a few people to kill hundreds of thousands of people. The denser the crowd, the greater the damage. Then what? What would be the reaction if they really killed hundreds of thousands of civilians? What would be the reaction of the other countries, not the United States? At present, he and the Empress were like the demon kings of this world. He didn't want to kill too many people and end up killing himself. "Your Majesty, there's no hurry." Renbachien held the Empress's hand and interlocked their fingers. Tens of millions of people want to leave Gotham City, and they won't be able to do so in a short period of time. After speaking, Renbachien looked up at the sky. He wasn't sure if it was because he was afraid of provoking the Empress to kill the civilians below or because he already knew that the Empress had sharp senses and that the lasers couldn't hurt them, but they stood on the rooftop for a while and didn't attack. However, there were many helicopters, flying cars, and flying motorcycles hovering in the sky in the distance. "What are you waiting for?" The Empress turned to look at him, and the red light in her eyes dimmed. Renbachien glanced at her and saw that her eyes were red. They weren't bloodshot like other people's eyes. Instead, they seeped out of her pupils like a burning flame. It was extremely special, and he didn't know why. I reckon that this time, everyone will have a new understanding of our strength. After giving them time to accept it, Renbochin rubbed his chin. It didn't take long for his mood to turn sour. Would his hair and beard grow out one day? And the bird's nest? Chapter 11:27. At this time, many people were watching an image of a woman in red. With a single step, everyone within a radius of hundreds of meters exploded, and the chaotic street instantly turned into a sea of blood. The smell of blood passed through the screen and made many people feel uneasy. As Renbochin thought, the Empress's actions this time scared many people. Although she had previously destroyed an army in the Rising Sun City and destroyed countless buildings with her steps, she wasn't as unscrupulous as this time. She attacked indiscriminately. Under such an attack, any army would be powerless to resist. Even 100,000 elite soldiers would be destroyed in an instant in the face of such an enemy. The woman looked delicate and heroic. Her red clothes were like fresh blood, and she stood there looking fierce and awe-inspiring, making people shudder. It wasn't just her killing methods, but also her indifference to human life. It wasn't scary to have strength, as long as there were means and moral constraints. However, those who were strong but unrestrained were the most terrifying. In China, some people who were ready to make trouble were sweating profusely. If they really dared to make a move, they would probably follow in the footsteps of the US Americans. I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse to have such an existence, someone couldn't help but say. So what if it's a blessing? So what if it's a curse? Guns couldn't kill her, missiles couldn't blast her to death, and even poisonous gas was useless. With the speed she displayed, even the most destructive weapons couldn't hit her. She could be called invincible. In the future, we must be careful not to provoke her ferocious nature. The effect of poison gas on the Empress was unknown, but it had a certain effect on Earth Wheel and Spirit Wheel experts. It was just that their bodies were strong, so the effect was much slower. If there were ordinary people around, even if the poison gas was colorless and odorless, they would still be easily detected. It would be even easier if there were mice or some air detection devices on the body. Fortunately, we are only in contact with gate number 2. He grew up on Earth, so his ideas aren't much different from ordinary people. As long as no one provokes him, he won't cause trouble. Even so, who can guarantee that he will be like this in the future? If he has any ulterior motives, who can stop him? In the starry sky, individual strength is nothing, someone suddenly said. Everyone looked over in surprise. In the starry sky, humans were still based on Earth, so the sudden mention of the starry sky was certainly not a casual remark. Could it be that the research has been done? Someone asked with joy. We've made progress and calculated a point. As soon as these words came out, everyone's spirits shook, and they couldn't conceal the joy on their faces. Don't panic and pass quickly. If anyone tries to cause trouble at this time, kill them immediately. At an intersection, dozens of people in police uniforms were clearing the way for the fleeing crowd. There were natural disasters and people in the world. Renbochin and the others were actually terrorists, but it was a natural disaster for the Americans. Some people were of people. There were robberies, violent clashes, pushing and shoving, trampling, and even shooting in the crowd. The police were all on high alert. I dawn of people of people. I dawn. There are at least millions of people. I don't know. What are they? From time to time, the crowd could see light shadows floating in the air. From them, they could see a red-clothed woman moving forward. On her path, everyone within 100 meters of her exploded into flesh and blood. The buildings on both sides were collapsing and collapsing. This scene was taken from a tall building. Not long after, the image began to shake and concrete could be seen falling down. Everyone who was 100 meters away from her exploded into flesh and blood, and the buildings on both sides were collapsing. There was more than one such scene. In fact, such videos were everywhere on the internet. Apart from the woman, there were also several burly men holding cold weapons and a bespectacled woman wearing metal armor and a battle skirt. In fact, such videos were everywhere on the internet. In addition to the woman, there were also several burly men with cold weapons and a bespectacled woman in metal armor and a battle skirt. Don't talk about that. If you don't want to cover the flag, hurry and clear the crowd, someone shouted. A brown-haired woman in a police uniform suddenly saw something jump up from a distance. Be careful, they are coming. The policewoman was frightened and quickly raised her gun. Be careful, they are coming. The policewoman was frightened and quickly raised her gun. The others did the same. A woman in armor and battle skirt leaped dozens of meters into the air and crossed hundreds of meters toward the crowd. Without anyone's order, everyone opened fire. The sword in the woman's hand turned into a sword ray, deflected the bullets, and pounced directly in front of the crowd. There was no emotion in her eyes behind her glasses. With a flash of cold light, the heads of the 3 policemen at the front flew into the sky. Like a tiger charging into a flock of sheep, only a white policeman was left sitting paralyzed on the ground with yellow liquid flowing between his legs. He held the shotgun with both hands and pointed it at the other party, his hands trembling. Devil, devil, you are not a human, you are a devil. Ah! He cried as if he had a mental breakdown. Enchanting looked at him coldly and slashed the sword in her hand. The crowd, which was already chaotic, became even more chaotic when she arrived. There were cries and screams everywhere. No matter how cold and bloodthirsty one was, it was inevitable that they would feel compassion when they saw this scene. However, Enchanting didn't feel anything. She leaped onto a telephone pole not far away and looked into the distance. There was a viaduct in front of her, and there were troops setting up defenses on it. She pounced over like lightning, and the sword in her hand smashed into the line of defense of the troops like a sledgehammer. The entire viaduct was immediately broken, burying the troops below. Countless Americans were at a loss. Why was there such a person? Since there was such a person, why didn't superheroes appear? I'm hungry, the Empress said as she landed beside Renbachien. The ground below had collapsed a few meters. Originally, there was a subway line below, and many people were hiding in it. However, at this moment, a section of the subway line and the stations along the way had completely collapsed. The Empress had killed countless people, and the ground below had turned into a sea of blood. However, there wasn't much of the smell of blood on her body, and she still had that alluring fragrance. When she said, "I'm hungry," although her voice was cold, Renbachien could hear a hint of a young girl's coquettish tone. "I'll get someone to prepare." Renbachien first contacted someone. There were people from China in Gotham City, and they were hiding underground. They even used all their connections to prepare some meat that was enough to feed 1,000 people. It was probably only enough to fill the stomachs of the Empress, Qin Chuan, and the rest. With this amount of food, ordinary people couldn't afford to feed them. "Let's go and find Minister Qin and the rest. Once we find them, we can start eating," Renbachien said. Although Gotham City was huge, it only took 2 breaths to travel a kilometer under the Empress's feet. It wouldn't take much time to find them. After seeing them, Renbachien looked disgusted. He saw that Qin Chuan and the rest were covered in flesh and blood, and the thick smell of blood was nauseating. Only Enchanting looked clean, but the smell of blood was extremely strong. The only thing that made him feel regretful was that Feng Shuo had indeed died from the poison gas. Now, each of them had a cat or a pet dog tied tightly around their waists. They were as pitiful as they could be. They used these little things to detect the poison gas in advance. When they arrived, it was a basement. There was a big metal door on the outside, and the area inside was huge. There were 6 Chinese people inside. When they saw them come in, they trembled with fear in their eyes. They already knew about what was happening outside through the internet. Even if they received orders, they would still feel fear when they saw these people. This wasn't a matter of killing a few people. They had seen many of such people, and they wouldn't feel anything. However, the people in front of them had killed tens of thousands of people with cold weapons. They weren't like nuclear bombs that could be detonated with the press of a button. Even the most courageous people would feel fear when they saw them. Someone wants to talk to you. A bearded man threw a communication device over and retreated. He didn't dare to go near them. Fupin Chinese. Chapter 1128. Norman Board sat in the president's office with a pale face. After mobilizing the people of Gotham City to evacuate, he had been in the same position since he returned here. The biggest problem now was how to stop those people. If they couldn't be stopped, then they would find a way to negotiate. From the current situation, it was not impossible to negotiate. Although the goal was very tough, the United States was a country after all, and the other side had a precedent of negotiating with the Rising Sun City. It was just that the other side did not give them a chance to negotiate at all. They had to take the initiative to find this opportunity. Then what price would they have to pay? Thinking of this, Norman Board's face was bitter. He could be said to be the most incompetent president in the history of the United States. Even if this matter could be solved in the end, he would be finished. After a long silence, Norman Board sighed. Let's see what the consortium had to say first. He needed their support. He pressed a button on the table, and a middle-aged man walked into the room in a moment. Before he spoke, the communicator lit up. Seeing the name displayed on it, Norman Board immediately connected. Mr. Mellon. Mr. President, do you have a solution for the current situation? The other end of the communicator was a middle-aged man in his 50s. In fact, he was 10 years older than he looked. It's difficult for our soldiers to defeat them. We've tried, but we've failed without exception. It's not that the military is incompetent, but that the other side is too powerful. You must know this. We need to find a way to negotiate with the other side first, even if we have to pay a price, then we can find a chance to retaliate. I'm trying to get in touch with them now. Mr. President, you're very clear-headed. You know what to do. But have you thought about what kind of price to pay? The price must be high, but we should be able to afford it, right? In fact, I wanted to contact you a minute ago. I need your support, Norman Board said slowly. He must get the support of the other side, and the other side must support him. Because this matter itself had the intentions of some consortia. Many people were very interested in the two people themselves, hoping to study ways to make people stronger from them. Yes, we support you, but we hope to show more sincerity with a smaller price. Mellon smiled. This is difficult. No, it's not that difficult. Mellon's smile and words made Norman Board have a bad feeling. This time, someone has to sacrifice something. In their hearts, you are their enemy, the main culprit. Perhaps Mr. Minister of Defense as well. Norman Board's eyes widened and his body trembled slightly. There was disbelief in his eyes. Aren't you afraid that I'll tell others? I won't agree, I'm just following your request. You will agree, you still have family, they will live well. I told you, you're a very smart person. Besides, you have no choice. Norman Board instinctively looked up at the middle-aged man standing not far away. The man, who had always been respectful to him, now seemed to have changed into a different person, his eyes cold. Ren Xia, do you know? Something big has happened in America. A young girl skipped to the side of a young man. The young man was very handsome, and the smile on his face was very gentle. I already know. Ren Xia smiled. His smile was as gentle as usual, like the sunlight, dazzling one's eyes. The girl's face was a little shy, but her attention quickly shifted elsewhere. With your status, you must have known about it long ago. Was the video real? My worldview has been shattered. Was that really a human? The young girl had a shocked expression on her face. She was obviously frightened by what was shown in the video. In fact, very few people in the country knew about this matter. After all, the domestic internet was very tightly controlled, especially regarding this matter. Any related comments and videos that appeared on the domestic internet would be deleted within seconds. Most of the people who knew about this matter were those who went to foreign websites when they had nothing to do, or those who were more well-informed. It should be true. I heard that the people of Gotham City have already been evacuated. This information is correct, Ren Xia said calmly. Of course, he knew that it was true. He even recognized the most powerful one among them and saw his uncle in it. He understood why his uncle was a henpecked husband. It was the same for anyone else. However, his aunt was really terrifying. Even though he already knew that she was a spirit world expert who surpassed low-level experts, he didn't expect her to be so terrifying. What was even more terrifying was that his aunt's expression didn't change much after killing so many people. She didn't hesitate at all and treated human lives as if they were worthless. He knew about the plane explosion and heard that the Americans were behind it, but he didn't expect his uncle and auntie to be so terrifying in the face of the second most powerful country in the world. They faced the entire country alone, and they were so fearless that the other party couldn't do anything to them. He doubted whether he could look them in the eye in the future. He also had other doubts. Who were the other people? Why hadn't he seen them before? Where did these peerless experts come from? How many of them were there? What exactly were the identities of his uncle and aunt? They made such a big deal out of this matter. How would things develop? Are they Chinese? Do you know who they are? Which department are they from? Can our martial arts reach their level? Ren Xia occasionally responded to the young girl's words while thinking about his own thoughts. He took the communication device, played with it for a while, and threw it aside. Since they weren't contacting him directly, they couldn't be the important people in the country. The most likely culprit was the Americans. The country didn't want to get involved at the moment, so they contacted him through this method. Even if it was someone from the country, they were the middlemen of the Americans. Since the important people in the country didn't contact him, it meant that the situation was still acceptable to them, and his operation could continue. After all, he was mainly here for revenge and to deter others. However, this didn't mean that he was ready to cut himself off from the world. It wasn't a big deal to fight with the Americans, but he still had to be cautious about the opinions of some people in the country. After all, the Empress wasn't invincible, and he had a lot of needs on Earth. Like a banquet, the food was served in bowls and could be removed after 2 minutes. After eating a little, Renbachin began to browse the internet. At this time, the internet was in an uproar. The domestic internet was calm, but the foreign internet was like a typhoon passing through. Almost all of them were engulfed by what happened in the United States. There were all kinds of comments, including anger, doubt, sympathy, curiosity, and admiration. With such a powerful force, there were naturally people who yearned for it, but there were also people who labeled it as anti-human. The internet was in a foul mood. Fupin Chinese. Chapter 1129. In just half a day, the United States had already suffered huge losses. One had to know that the Empress had gone on a killing spree in Manhattan, where Wall Street and most of the world's top 500 companies were located. Almost everyone here was an elite from the Citibank and other industries. This was also the cornerstone of the country. It wasn't unacceptable to lose tens of thousands of people. However, the composition of the people made many people feel pain. Needless to say, the Empress's killing spree made many people afraid. The combat power she displayed could be said to be invincible. If she wanted someone's life, no one could stop her. In a situation where they couldn't defeat her, paying a certain price to make peace was the only option. However, Renbachien didn't even bother with their contact requests. As a last resort, some people had to urgently negotiate with the higher-ups of China. That afternoon, the casualties increased by tens of thousands. Now, the number of casualties had already exceeded 100,000. The number of casualties caused in just one day was enough to make the United States unable to recover for 10 years. Needless to say, the huge shock brought about by this incident had a similarly huge impact on the United States. That night, Renbachien received a call from China. Mr. Ren. Yang Sun looked at the young man on the other end of the communication device with mixed feelings. It was hard to imagine that a few people could actually force such a powerful country to such a state. Even though he had been dealing with Renbachien for many years and had a fairly deep understanding of him and number one, it was still hard to imagine. The President of the United States is dead. I haven't even gone to find trouble with him, but he's already dead. Don't tell me he died from fear. Renbachien was stunned for a moment before laughing. Although not, it's almost the same. The president committed suicide, which can be said to be an apology with his death. Yang Sun sorted out his emotions. He knew that he couldn't escape. The power that you displayed is enough to prove that no matter where he is, he can't escape. Renbachien was silent for a while. Things definitely weren't that simple. So? Renbachien asked. Regarding the attack on you, the president and the defense minister issued the order. Although the defense minister is still alive, as long as you want, you can decide his life or death. This also includes those who have been through it. Deciding the life or death of a powerful country's defense minister was already unimaginable for ordinary people. It was even hard to accept that the head of the country and the head of the military could be abandoned at any time. But, as Yang Sun said, if Renbachien and the Empress wanted to, they could kill anyone within a certain range. Is this an abandoned peace? I'm rather curious as to who talked to you. Renbachien had some guesses. Although he didn't pay much attention to Earth in recent years, he still knew a little about the United States. When he went to that world, the United States was already the most powerful country in the world. Its internal form was not a secret. I only know that DuPont and Mellon Consortium are involved. I don't know anything else. Yang Sun hesitated for a moment. What role did they play in this incident? Renbachien wondered. He wasn't sure what role these consortiums played in this incident. But he guessed that he might be playing some roles that weren't very good. City was the city of the consortium. Of course, it wasn't certain either. After all, no one knew that the Empress was so powerful before she revealed her incorruptibility. If the President of the United States wanted to deal with a few slightly stronger humans, he didn't need anyone else's opinion. Especially since he had bombed their military base. However, he still felt that it was more likely that the consortium played a role in this. Do you think I would know about such a thing? Yang Sun asked. That's true. In any case, they want to talk peace. It can be said that you have forced a country to bow down to you. Even the president is dead, the Minister of Defense can be handed over, and the culprit has been punished. Not to mention the bloodshed in Gotham City. They will also make other compensations. Yang Sun didn't say it directly. His tone and demeanor were also discussing, but he still expressed some of the country's thoughts at this time. The culprit was already dead, and revenge had been taken. The whole world had been blown up, so it was about time to stop. After all, it couldn't go on forever. The culprit isn't necessarily the one who will be punished. Renbachien said faintly. What do you want? Yang Sen asked directly. I would like to know what benefits they gave you to contact me directly. Ren Baqian asked. He wanted to know what role those consortiums played, but they definitely wouldn't admit it. The insider was probably the unlucky president who was already dead. The Minister of Defense didn't need to know the specific situation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been handed over to Ren Baqian alive. As for the rest, the country definitely received some benefits from the US. Furthermore, these benefits could shut the mouths of many people, which was why Yang Sen said such a thing. At this time, Ren Baqian was reminding some people. After all, he was the one who was bombed, and he was the one who did it. You want me to stop after receiving benefits? How can there be such a good thing? It's up to me to decide when to stop. Yang Sen's gaze shifted as if he was looking at something. He then said, That gentleman wants to talk to you. Ren Baqian nodded slightly. He switched the call to another number. The person talking to Ren Baqian was one of the top figures in China. After talking for a while, Ren Baqian's face revealed a shocked expression. After talking for a while, they ended the call, and Ren Baqian fell into deep thought. The Empress wasn't nearby. Instead, she was stirring up a sea of blood in the distance. Ren Baqian put Lin Chaola aside and stood on the edge of the 5th floor of a broken building. His eyes flickered incessantly. The news that he had just received was too important and too shocking. The Chinese Academy of Sciences discovered a curve in the universe that distorted the concepts of time and space. There were nodes on it, and one could reach other nodes through one node. The most important thing was that they had already calculated the location of one of the nodes. In other words, from the discovery of the curve and the node, mankind would enter the interstellar era. This discovery was enough to shock everyone. After all, entering the interstellar era meant that Earth had entered a brand new, vast, and filled with countless possibilities. To make a discovery in a short period of time and enter the interstellar era wasn't something that a country could do alone. It required the whole world to abandon disputes and participate in this together in order to achieve this. Not only did the US suffer heavy losses under the hands of the Empress, but it also paid a huge price to establish contact with China. This allowed China to gain a lot and occupy an absolute leading position when the world entered the interstellar era in the future. Under such circumstances, the matter between Ren Baqian and the US was something new. Furthermore, Ren Baqian would also benefit greatly from this. Not only would he receive a large amount of compensation from the US, but his and Ren Wanyan's industries would also be able to participate in certain aspects of the interstellar exploration. This benefit was too great. It was so great that Ren Baqian couldn't refuse it. Chapter 1130. Father, why are you doing this? A young man rushed into the room and said angrily. Are you questioning me, Charles? The old man's voice was very calm, but it made the young man's forehead sweat. No, I just don't understand. The young man slowed down his voice. We are the Mellon family. We are one of the top 10 consortiums. We control everything in this country. Why would we admit defeat to a few people? Our glory has been torn to pieces. Don't let arrogance blind your eyes. We have already lost. Since that is the case, we should not provoke such a powerful enemy. We should quietly lurk and wait for the opportunity to come. We will take back everything. The old man's eyes were full of calmness. We didn't do our best. Although they are strong, we still have a chance. Especially the president. Why did we abandon him so easily? Even if we want to push him to that position, it is not an easy task. He can still do more things. He is their target. Even if we must abandon him, there are other ways to make them pay a heavy price. For example, let him hide in the military base and then detonate the military base. Is this your idea? The old man turned his gaze to him with inexplicable emotions in his eyes. The young man was stunned for a moment. His father was right. This was his idea, and it was one of the last choices. Before that, there were still many ways to try. No matter what, it should not be the current situation. Yes, they escaped the explosion on the plane last time. It was just that the power was not enough, and the range was not big enough. If the power is enough, I believe it can kill them. They are not invincible. They are not gods, nor are they demons. Even gods can be injured. The young man said his idea loudly. If the power was not enough, the equivalent would make up for it. As long as the power was enough, there was no one who could not be killed. How can you be sure that they will do what you think? Child, the old man asked. Their target, but they are not in a hurry to kill the target. You see, they are not in a hurry to find the culprit for revenge. They can slowly kill in Gotham City until they reach Washington Mansion. And they did do so. Our government, the people's trust in the government, and the people's sense of security will all collapse in this process. If that is the case, what should we do? Wealth, glory, these are all important. But a stable order and country are the prerequisite for all of this. Even we cannot avoid the chaos brought by destruction. Besides, it's not like we don't have enemies. A lot of people are happy to see us suffer a big loss. If the incident continued to ferment, someone might leak some information to them. Before those people make up their minds, we must eliminate the danger first. The young man was at a loss for words, unable to think of a rebuttal. But the anger and hot blood that surged up did not subside in the slightest. Things should not have been like this. This should not have been the result. Moreover, they have a strong sense of danger, which allows them to escape from certain death many times. It can be seen from the use of space-based weapons that even light can't hit them. It was probably because of this that they were able to escape from the plane earlier. We don't have many methods to deal with them, and the ones that can threaten them are likely to be escaped by them. As the old man spoke, he pressed a button on the table, and an image appeared in the air. In the video, there was the current Minister of Defense, as well as several government and military officials. A total of 7 people were tied up. All 7 of them were in different states. Some of them had unconcealable fear on their faces and were trembling all over. Some were filled with anger and were shouting as if they had lost their minds. In front of them were a man and a woman. Seeing the woman in red, the young man's eyes flashed with amazement. The Empress's facial features were extremely beautiful even in the eyes of Caucasians. In particular, her heroic spirit and iceberg-like temperament, as well as her powerful strength, were extremely attractive to the Americans who advocated freedom and heroism. Strength and temperament were her best accessories. After the amazement, the young man shifted his gaze back to the people who were tied up and frowned. Why are they so unbearable? This shouldn't be. Of course. The old man smiled and was happy to explain. Their adrenaline secretion is relatively high, which makes them fearful, anxious, furious, agitated, and unable to stabilize their emotions. The young man thought about it and felt that there must be a reason for this. Then, he said thoughtfully, "Is there a problem with the air? The other 2 aren't affected." The old man clapped his hands to express his appreciation. "That's right, child. You are very smart. This is a small attempt. We have tried a few types of nerve gas before, and the results are the same. This doesn't mean that they are immune to this kind of attack, but it is enough to show that their physique has a stronger resistance that is 10 times stronger than ordinary people. This allows them to have a higher tolerance for mistakes when they are faced with danger." Then, the old man said in a deep voice, "Extraordinary speed, powerful strength, strong physical fitness, and an extremely strong sense of danger. These are the things that they have that we look forward to. When they turn these into weapons, it is too dangerous for us. If we continue, it is very likely that we will be dragged into the abyss. This matter will temporarily stop here. Although our losses are not small, it is not unacceptable. On the other hand, if someone were to link up with them, the result would be unacceptable. Our family might even perish because of this. They may not be able to really destroy everyone in a country, but they have the ability to destroy a family, the old man concluded. I understand, father. The young man pondered for a long time and finally let go of his worries. I think I've learned a few things. No matter what kind of enemy you face, don't act rashly before figuring out everything. That is likely to bring destruction to yourself. I am very happy that you think this way, but we can't be too restrained. After all, we are melon, and there are very few existences that can bring us danger. It is enough to maintain a certain degree of humility and caution. While the head of the melon family was teaching the children, Renbochin looked at the few people in front of him who were bewildered because of fear and anger and felt rather bored. These are the officials of the United States. Renbochin said sarcastically. It was hard to imagine that these people planned to attack him and the Empress. Of course, there was also the corpse of the president. In the face of life and death, these big shots were even worse than ordinary people. The Empress glanced at them and said, they have been tampered with. Forget it, it doesn't matter. Renbochin put away his expression and also felt that it was meaningless to say anything to these people in such a state. He slowly extended a spear from his palm. Devil, devil, you are the devil. One of the officials said in horror and tried to shrink back. Unfortunately, he was tied to a chair, so his actions were meaningless. Renbochin cut the throats of these people, turned his head to the side, and revealed a sinister smile. He pointed the spear in his hand, and the scene in front of the two people in the distance suddenly turned black. The Empress pondered for a while and asked, are there only these few people behind the scenes? There may be others. However, even if there are others, they are very well hidden. We don't have any information, so we can only stop here for the time being. We still have a lot of time, and there will be many opportunities in the future. As long as we know who else is hostile to us. Renbochin turned his head to look at the Empress and felt that she was exceptionally beautiful these 2 days. He couldn't help but give her a hug. Immediately after, he felt a pain on his shoulder and saw the Empress pull out her finger. Your Majesty, what are you doing? Renbochin looked baffled. This kind of pain was nothing, but the Empress's behavior puzzled him. The Empress gently put her blood-stained finger into her mouth as if she was tasting something delicious. When I was killing these 2 days, a question suddenly appeared in my mind. What is it? What does your blood taste like? It's very sweet. Renbochin was shocked. Did you become obsessed with killing people? Chapter 1131. Useless. Renbochin wanted to scold her as he looked at her curled up on the sofa and slept until the end of time. This guy was really too useless. She was the only one who was seriously injured by an explosion and then hit by a car. In Renbochin's eyes, she had already become the kind of person who couldn't be helped. She wasn't weak, but she wasn't reliable either. Especially when she was constantly in a state of craving for sleep, it could be said to be her greatest weakness. Perhaps she would only get better when she became an adult. Only God knew when she would become an adult since she was already over 50 years old. Renbochin turned his head and looked at the Empress, who was watching the movie attentively, and felt a little worried. The Empress didn't seem to have any problems at the moment, but as the person closest to her, he naturally noticed something wrong with her. Ever since she started killing, she seemed to have a craving for fresh blood. Whenever she was with him, she always wanted to bite him as if he was more attractive than dessert. Just like what she once said, his blood tastes sweet. Also, the way she looked at him reminded him of a song called Bloody Love Story. Furthermore, she had shown a preference for blood wine and blood cakes these 2 days. This wasn't a good sign. He didn't know if the killings had caused her to have some kind of bias or if it was a problem with her. Even the Empress herself wasn't sure. If this situation continued, Renbachyan suspected that he would become a tyrant empress. Although she had a tendency to be a tyrant before, a bloodthirsty tyrant was obviously more serious. No matter how he thought about it, she was like a supervillain in an anime. After thinking about it, he threw these messy thoughts aside and decided to observe the Empress's condition first. Hopefully, she would gradually recover as time passed. "Your Highness, there's no more wine," Lian Liang shouted from a nearby room. Qin Chuan and the others were in that room and couldn't extricate themselves from the sea of wine. "Oh, I'll get someone to send it over," Renbachyan called out after he came back to his senses. "There's one more thing." Lian Liang hesitated. "Speak. Is there a girl?" Lian Liang laughed and explained, "It's boring with just a few of us. We need a few singers and someone to accompany us to drink." Renbachyan narrowed his eyes and glanced at them. All of them had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and none of them were good people. However, Qin Chuan and Tong Jinye had fought dozens of times at the top of a brothel. Both of them were experienced, and going to a brothel was like going home. The girls there were pleasant to the ear, beautiful, and docile. But to say such words in front of the Empress, they were really not afraid of getting beaten up. "Forget it, I'll get someone to bring you there." Renbachyan rubbed his forehead and decided to get someone to bring them to the club. There was a pretty good clubhouse in Wuji City. The ladies there were generally at the manwu level, had excellent looks, were highly educated, or were skilled in other areas, such as playing the piano. Although it was a clubhouse, the girls inside also relied on their own abilities to make a living. They sold their bodies, not their skills. They were different from the flirtatious sluts outside. After getting someone to take them away, the Empress acted as if she didn't see them and continued to immerse herself in the television series. He really wanted to say, "Aw, women." Regardless of which world it was, or what identity it was, Renbachyan waited for a while before seeing Renwanyan. Brother, sister-in-law. As one of the most famous tycoons in the world and the head of the most famous technology company, Renwanyan obediently sat there, sweating profusely. It was too stressful to sit near the Empress. After knowing what happened in the United States, not many people could look the Empress in the eye. Upon seeing this, Renbachyan took him to another room for the afternoon, mainly to discuss the upcoming exploration of the universe. The higher-ups of China had great expectations for this exploration and were somewhat impatient. Renbachyan could understand this. Who didn't want to see humans leave Earth in their lifetime? Moreover, some of the new elements, minerals, and even new plants might be discovered. Perhaps any of these could allow Earth's technology to break through the current limitations in a short period of time and embark on a faster path. The Academy of Sciences calculated that the node was between Mars and Jupiter. Within 3 months, a United States spacecraft on Mars would be transferred to the node, and China would also send 2 intelligent robots and some equipment to the spacecraft. At the same time, with China taking the lead, most of the developed countries in the world would work together to build 3 brand new spacecraft that used the latest technologies from all countries to head to the node within a year. Renbachyan's reward for coming back from the United States this time was to allow Renwanyan's company to participate in the exploration. The benefits of doing so were self-evident. Participating in the exploration would not only be able to receive information from the other side of the node, but also be able to obtain various technologies and experience during the construction of the spacecraft. It could be said to be a huge gain. In the future, if they really entered the interstellar era, the company could use this opportunity to expand their business to spaceship manufacturers. This was also what Renbachyan needed. Therefore, what Renwanyan needed to do now was to recruit some aviation scientists and professionals. At the same time, Renbachian was also prepared to send some people to participate. Sword masters from another world. After all, time was tight in that world, and training talents and advancing technology couldn't be delayed. These sword masters were the most suitable. First of all, most of these sword masters didn't have many concerns. Second, they only moved in their own small circle and rarely interacted with outsiders. Moreover, the materials they needed could only be obtained from the other world, and they couldn't get rid of themselves. Finally, their learning ability was heaven-defying. According to what that foreigner said last time, we should be able to get out after climbing over that mountain in front. That is the border of the 60,000 mountains. Su Gongso looked into the distance and saw a wall-like mountain range standing between heaven and earth, covering his entire field of vision. Li Fu looked into the distance and was silent for a moment with mixed feelings. He said faintly, "We are going out. We should be the first batch of humans to go out in thousands of years, right?" Su Gongso laughed. As a top expert, it had been a long time since his blood had been so hot, and his mood hadn't been so upbeat. Don't forget that there was a group of people a few decades ago. Li Fu turned around and looked behind him. There were endless mountains and ferocious beasts everywhere. It was unknown how many people were buried here. They didn't go in this direction. Chi Sitting followed their tracks, but I don't know where they went or whether they got out in the end. Su Gongso then changed the topic to the outside world. The homeland of our ancestors, the land where humans have lived for countless years. I'm really looking forward to what it will be like. Moreover, we can go further after we get out. Here, I can already feel the shackles that have been restraining me stirring. Li Fu stood there for a long time. His eyes lit up, and an inexplicable feeling rose from his body. It was as if something had broken out of the ground and revealed a bud. It was as if something had changed in his body, and everyone around him had noticed it. Li Fu ordered, "We will set off after resting for half an hour. Everyone, clean up all traces in the vicinity and don't let anyone know that we have been here. There are millions of humans behind us, so we can't be careless. Before we are ready, we must not let them discover us." Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1132. The closer they got to the edge of the 60,000 mountains, the more astonishing the mountain range in front of them became. The entire mountain range was black and almost barren. It was thousands of feet high and almost perpendicular to the ground. It was difficult for apes and monkeys to climb and even birds to cross. However, the top of the mountain was golden under the sun and looked strangely beautiful. Su Gongso's eyes were filled with fascination as he chanted loudly. 10,000 feet in the clouds, the sun and moon shine on the golden platform. Inu, who was 2 meters tall and had thick eyebrows and big eyes, said, "The yellow crane can't fly too fast, and the ape wants to climb." Great Xia emphasized literature, but there was little entertainment in this world. Most of the top experts had dabbled in music, chess, calligraphy, and poetry. If it was an aboriginal expert, he could only sigh and say, "Damn, it's so F***king high and so F***king steep." Li Fu had these words in his mind, but he was too embarrassed to say them out loud. He was a blacksmith and had been running around all his life. Other than smithing, beating people, and surviving in the wilderness, he knew almost nothing else. "This doesn't look like a cliff. It looks like a huge wall. The majesty of heaven and earth is really amazing," Inu, who was close to the cliff, couldn't help but say. The continuous mountain range that they could see from afar was now completely revealed to them. Other than a few cracks in the distance, the rest of the mountain range was a straight line of cliffs. There were layers of lines on the cliffs, as if they were formed by some kind of black substance that flowed down and solidified. Other than that, there was almost no place to stay. If it wasn't for the fact that the mountain range was so huge, they would have believed that it was a man-made wall that separated the 60,000 mountains from the other side. The two cracks that they could see were where the doors were. There are probably foreign tribes at the two cracks. Let's not alarm them and go up to the top to see what's going on, Li Fu said. As for the lack of a place to stay, it was easy to deal with. Su Gongso touched the surface of the cliff. It seemed to be made of metal and stone, but he didn't know what material it was. In fact, they had seen many things in the 60,000 mountains that they had never seen before, so they weren't surprised. Su Gongso pecked the cliff with his fingers, making a metallic sound. He only felt a strong force rebounding his fingers. He quickly shook his hand and took a few steps back. His fingers were slightly red and swollen. Everyone was surprised to see this. Su Gongso was one of the top 10 experts in the world, able to break steel with a casual strike. Yet, not only did he fail to damage the cliff in front of him, he even suffered a small loss. This isn't an ordinary rock or ore, this sentence was nonsense, and everyone could see it now. Let me try. Gao Yi raised his right hand, and a long spear appeared in his hand. Su Gongso was one of the top 10 experts in the world, yet he could not even injure him with a single strike. Although he had not used his full strength, the sturdiness of the cliff in front of him was evident. In this way, the experts who were weaker than him and were mostly empty-handed didn't need to make a move. Gao Yi was ranked around the 20th strongest expert in the world. The spear in his hand was extremely sharp, and it was a good opportunity for him to test it out. Following a few soft sounds, sparks burst forth. Gao Yi's expression changed slightly. Not only was this mountain wall incomparably hard, but there was also a rebounding force when the tip of the spear touched it, making him feel rather uncomfortable. He poured his divine will into the body of the spear, but in the end, it only left a few marks the size of rice grains on the cliff. I don't believe that every part of it is so hard. Gao Yi's expression changed, and his body moved continuously. Following his figure, from low to high, from left to right, the sounds of collisions rang out incessantly. This time, everyone's expression changed greatly. The cliff with a circumference of a few hundred meters was actually made of such a material. It was incomparably hard and difficult to destroy with human strength. Is this cliff really a natural wonder? How could human strength create such a vast mountain range? Even the ancient human emperors couldn't have done it. How exactly was this cliff formed? Everyone felt that it was inconceivable. Li Fu stared at the cliff with rapt attention. A short rod appeared in his hand, and he fiercely tapped it forward. Like the sound of glass shattering, the cliff where the short rod landed cracked like a spider web. When the rod tapped it again, the cliff shattered into pieces, revealing a hole the size of a bowl. Everyone didn't know that Li Fu had already used the god's rod, which could see the weakness of an object, and only made such a small hole. They only felt that he was worthy of being the world's #1 expert. The cliff that everyone was helpless against was broken into such a large piece with just one tap of his rod. This is metal. Someone picked up the broken piece and asked in surprise. It doesn't look like metal. It feels strange, somewhat like metal, but also like rock. Someone held it under the sunlight and said in surprise, "This thing can actually transmit light." One had to know that metals weren't able to transmit light. Most of the things that could transmit light were gems, crystals, jades, and other minerals like those in Dayo. However, this material was completely different to the touch. It was very rough, but it could transmit light, which amazed everyone. Li Fu tapped the ground with his rod again, causing the soil within a circumference of several meters to explode. The rock exposed below was as solid as the cliff wall. Following Li Fu's action, everyone started to work. In a short while, a large pit that was tens of meters deep was formed on the ground. The exposed base of the cliff was the same as the top. Only then did everyone give up. The things here are different from what we know in the past. Let's check out the situation of the two gaps first. Li Fu pondered for a moment and said. Originally, he wanted to climb to the top of the mountain and check out the two gaps. However, he needed to use the god's rod to form a foothold to climb to the top of the mountain. Even with his full strength, he could only use the rod 6 times. It was 3 kilometers high, and each gap was 20 meters. He needed at least 150 gaps. In addition, the higher he climbed, the more difficult it would be, and the greater the consumption. He estimated that it would take at least 1 to 2 months. Instead of doing this, it was better to check out the surrounding situation first. Go check out the 2 gaps and see if there's a place to climb to the top of the mountain. Be careful of the foreign races and don't get discovered, Li Fu ordered. In fact, when everyone came here, the situation of the cliff was almost the same as before. They couldn't see any place to climb to the top of the mountain, and they were just doing this while checking out the gaps. There were a total of 32 people present. After destroying the villages of the Thunder Barbarians and the 8-armed race, everyone was divided into 3 teams. One team was led by Chi Ziding and the other aboriginals to continue searching for the traces of the first emperor of Dao and the ministers who had disappeared. The others were divided into 2 teams. One was to search for the scattered 8-armed race members, and the other was to find the exit. At the same time, if they encountered other foreign races and were discovered, they could use their superior strength to destroy the foreign race's village. One day later, everyone was within a radius of several kilometers of a gap. The roar of a monster could be heard in the distance. A moment later, everyone rushed over to investigate and found that it was a wild boar-like beast with scales and horns on its head. It was 7 meters tall and more than 12 meters long, standing there like a small hill. Even from a distance, they could feel the ferocity of the beast, which was at least at the level of a god. On the back of the beast, there were 3 hairy foreign races that looked like humans. There are indeed foreign races. No one was surprised. There were only 2 gaps within a radius of 500 kilometers. It would be strange if there were no foreign races. Be careful and observe from afar. Don't go near the east. That side is windy, and the beasts usually have a stronger sense of smell, an expert who looked like a child said. An expert who looked like a child said. His name was Golden Child, also known as Wealth Child. He was known for being rich, very rich, even richer than the royal family of the Great Xia dynasty. The imperial family of Great Xia only had a history of a few hundred years, but the Jin family had been around for thousands of years and had a deep foundation. There are some beasts' corpses tied to the beast. It seems that they have returned from hunting. Follow them carefully and you will be able to find their location. Just as they expected, these foreign races had returned from hunting and did not realize that a few humans were observing them from afar. There had been no beasts in the 2 boundaries here for more than 1,000 years. Hence, they were very relaxed and returned to the village with their prey. Everyone watched from afar as they left the 60,000 mountains, passed through the exit, and went to the outside world. At this point, everyone knew that the exit was about 1.5 kilometers wide and 2.5 kilometers thick. This meant that the mountain range was 2.5 kilometers thick and about 2,500 meters wide. However, they did not know if there were other foreign races, so they did not dare to act rashly. It was not until late at night that they finally found their way to the exit. As soon as they arrived, they could feel the strong wind blowing into their bodies and even into their minds. This wind is very beneficial to us martial artists. If we practice here, we will get twice the results with half the effort. I also feel that my bottleneck seems to have loosened by more than half. As long as we find a secluded place to practice in the outside world and spend some time, we will be able to break through, an expert said in surprise. Sure enough, the outside world is very different from where we came from. In this environment, practitioners who were originally stuck at the earth will level can also cultivate to the spirit will level. Everyone's faces were filled with wild joy. It was exactly as Renbochin had said. As long as they could get out, everyone could advance further. Chapter 1133. The moment they returned to the palace, Qin Chuan and the others, who had changed their equipment for the better, happily carried their new equipment back to the palace. Originally, their weapons were made of steel. At most, they added some spare metal to make them sharper than ordinary weapons. They relied more on their immense strength and acceleration to cut through steel. Therefore, their weapons were rather heavy. They were able to unleash greater power and were less likely to be destroyed in a collision. Now that they had gone to Earth, they had changed into equipment made of alloy. It was much better than their original equipment. It was much sharper and tougher. The only flaw was that it was much lighter and felt like a feather when used. However, even if they didn't use it, it would still be a good family heirloom. Xianzhi threw Lin Chaola back to Qingxin Palace Hall to recuperate, and the two of them went to bed. The next morning, Renbochin was woken up by a bite. He was bitten until he was dripping with blood. He wasn't sure if it could be considered a morning bite. In terms of time, it could be counted as a morning bite. The Empress bit open Renbochin's shoulder. Then, she gently licked his shoulder with her tongue and licked the blood clean. Her gaze was somewhat blurred. It was as if she wasn't licking blood, but sucking some white powder. Renbochin looked at the blurred gaze of the Empress and the bloodstain at the corner of her mouth. That kind of evil temptation made him unable to resist biting her lips. It was very soft, like jelly. However, no matter how hard he bit, he couldn't leave a mark. Instead, he was bitten by the Empress. Renbochin caressed the Empress's body and used all his strength to hold it. In the end, the official business turned into a hand-to-hand fight in broad daylight. This was war. In just 6 hours, Renbochin, who was reckless and dared to challenge the king, had no choice but to receive treatment from the doctor. After that, Dr. Shi simply waited outside the two's palace and had to treat Renbochin every 2 to 4 hours. The war that could have ended in 7 days became half a month. 7 days later, Renbochin returned to Earth riddled with wounds. The two of them destroyed more than 20 floors of a building. The rooms on the lower 3 floors were divided into multiple floors. Each floor was 60 centimeters thick. This was to reduce the damage caused when the two of them occasionally returned. Dividing a room into multiple floors was more practical and earthquake-resistant than filling the entire room with concrete. However, this was to no avail. First aid, body surface reinforcement, herbal nourishment, mechanical exoskeletons, and various other methods were used. There was a medical center on standby in Dayo and an emergency medical center on Earth at the same time. With this logistical support, Renbochin survived until the end of the war. The Empress let out a long moan and laid there lazily. The scissors on her body were like jade, smooth and exquisite, giving off a soft glow. On the other hand, Renbochin was paralyzed. The Empress, who had attained longevity heaven, was simply too powerful. To her, the slightest loss of control of her strength was a serious injury to him. Even though the Empress treated Renbochin as if he was the most precious and fragile porcelain, she still couldn't avoid such a fate. I was almost put into a box. I can't stop at all. Renbochin, who had regained consciousness, was very angry. He gave the Empress's pink buttocks a ruthless slap and pulled a piece of cloth to cover her buttocks. Then, he pressed the communication device and asked someone to carry him out for emergency treatment. Thanks to the medicines he had brought with him, the medical technology on Earth had improved a lot. This was especially true for external and bone injuries. With the many new medical equipment and the plants from the other world whose effects were reduced by half, the final treatment effect was almost as good as that of the other world. In terms of precision, it was even better. He fought from Dayo to Earth, from Earth to Dayo, and finally back to Earth. Renbochin was a living legend. In the eyes of many people, he was. The group of women between the ages of 20 and 50 looked at Renbochin with indescribable gazes. This was the first time they had seen someone with such fighting strength. What was even more tenacious was his will to fight. In fact, most people in the medical center felt that these two people were weirdos. Those who didn't know better would think that they were fighting to the death. In fact, the outcome was similar. First, Renbochin's exoskeleton was removed, followed by the enhanced cushioning protection on the surface of his body. Then, he treated the comminuted fractures in his legs and hip bone, the fractured spine, and the moderately injured Xiaobochin. Renbochin lay on the bed and casually browsed through the information on the internet. Currently, the internet was still full of the things that happened in the United States. However, some things were specious, and many things had been changed. As for the curved nodes of the universe, ordinary people wouldn't know about it for a short period of time. However, recently, there was a craze for learning the 34th set of exercises abroad. The strength that the Empress displayed was far beyond human imagination, and the majority of people who believed in science and technology turned to the embrace of personal strength. Beside Renbochin were all kinds of equipment. Now, the room was similar to some medical institutions. The Empress was sitting beside the bed. She picked an apple in her hand, and the skin of the apple exploded, leaving only the inner flesh. After finishing this action, the Empress casually threw the apple to one side. There was already a pile of peeled apples there, and someone would come in every corner to take the peeled apples away. There was still a ton of unpeeled apples outside. There were also 10 carts of apples that had just been transported to the building. In theory, there seemed to be nothing wrong with peeling fruits for a seriously injured lover. However, in fact, the Empress was only satisfying a little bit of her inner imagination. In short, it was self-satisfaction. Perhaps it also had the effect of training one's own control of strength. In any case, Renbochin guessed that the Empress didn't say anything. These 2 days, the students had been eating apples to the point of vomiting. The price of apples in all of Wuji City had risen slightly, and the prices of the better apples had risen even higher. A few days later, Renbochin, who had recovered from half of his injuries, returned to Dayo. The official business that he had to deal with half a month ago had piled up until now. The most important thing was that Li Fu and the others had found the exit of the 60,000 mountains. In fact, this news had already been sent back 10 days ago, but it simply didn't have the opportunity to reach them. So far, 2 exits had been found, and there was a relatively large foreign tribe outside each exit. One of the tribes mainly tamed ferocious beasts and had a population of about 6,000. The strongest member of the tribe was a foreign race with the strength of a longevity heaven expert. There were 7 cardinal heaven experts, but there were also more than 15 ferocious beasts at the cardinal heaven level and 1 at the longevity heaven level. The other tribe only had 3,000 people. They had human bodies, scorpion tails, and bone spurs on their backs. Among them, there were 3 longevity heaven experts and 13 cardinal heaven experts. These foreign races and ferocious beasts didn't cultivate their spirits, so their strength was based on that of the aboriginals. Compared to the overall strength of the foreign races, these 2 foreign races weren't very strong. In fact, they could even be considered weak. From a certain point of view, they were just gatekeepers. In modern terms, they were security guards and night watchmen. However, they were already strong enough for the human race. Furthermore, this was only their strength on the surface. It was unknown if there was anything else that they hadn't discovered. After spending half a month investigating the strength of the foreign races, Li Fu and the others were divided into several teams. 2 of them stayed nearby to intercept the possible survivors of the 8-armed race while the other 2 went in 2 different directions to investigate the situation in the distance. The other group of more than 30 people searched the depths of the 60,000 mountains for the location of the foreign races' villages. Chapter 1134. There was a steel knife above the head of lust. Beauty was like a saw that could cut through bones. Renbochin vowed to devote himself to the modernization of Dao and no longer indulge in women. He would turn over a new leaf and become a new man from today onwards. Half a year later, Renbochin arrived at the garden where the Empress was and saw two guards burying something in the garden. There were bloodstains scattered on the ground. Renbochin thought for a while and recalled a piece of news that envoys from the Qin nation would arrive in the past 2 days. The thing that was being carried at this moment gave him some guesses. After all, it seemed that no one had angered the Empress recently. In fact, no one could even come into contact with the Empress except for the palace maids and guards. The Empress was rather tolerant of the palace maids and guards. At least, she wouldn't bare her fangs unless they committed a grave mistake. The identity of the corpse that was being buried was obvious. He raised his head and asked, "Your Majesty, is it another envoy from the Qin nation? What's the reason this time? He looks too frivolous. That flower, and that first-grade fantasy color." The Empress instructed the palace maids to dig up her favorite flowers and transplant them over. Renbochin sighed slightly. The previous time, he was too ugly. The previous time, he was too short. This time, he was too frivolous. It seemed like the Empress was counting on the corpse of the Qin nation's envoy to fertilize her garden. After the news spread, the imperial court of the Qin nation would send a few unlucky fellows over after half a year. What was the reason for the Empress's next visit? His voice wasn't pleasant to hear. He hooked 3 fingers under the Empress's chin and was immediately bitten. The Empress immediately bit his middle finger and sucked the blood that flowed out. After a while, she let go with a blurry look in her eyes. The Empress had been addicted to this sweet and delicious snack for the past 6 months. Renbochin would often be bitten awake. However, the Empress wouldn't drink more than 10 milliliters each time. With Renbochin's physique, he could replenish it with 1 meal without any pressure. The previous massacre had activated a strange attribute in the Empress's body. It was unknown whether it was because of their dual cultivation, but the Empress especially liked Renbochin's blood to the point of being addicted to it. As for the others, the Empress preferred to see the sight and sound of blood spurting out of their bodies rather than eating them. After a while, the Empress's serious days subsided. Then, she spoke about a problem that had been on her mind recently. "Recently, there are more and more things that I have to deal with. I have to spend a lot of time and energy to deal with them. This has seriously slowed down the pace of my cultivation. Why don't you become the Prince Regent and control the entire court? This way, I can also devote more energy to cultivation." Renbochin sneered. "Should I put more energy into watching dramas? Prince Regent, are you going to spend the rest of your life alone and not see me for 10 days or half a month? Whoever wants to do it can do it, but I won't do it. Below only 1, above tens of thousands. Who knows how many people are fighting for this position?" Looking at the history of the past few thousand years, it was unknown how many powerful ministers had used all sorts of methods in order to obtain this position, but how many of them had a good ending. "You are personally appointed by me, and your status and knowledge are recognized by the court officials." The Empress continued to look at him expectantly. "Ha!" Renbochin replied with a single word. Not far away, Qing Yuan, Hong Yuan, and the imperial guards all had strange looks on their faces. If this conversation were to spread, it would become a strange story. The Empress lay there lazily, squinted her eyes, and didn't look at him to express her current mood. "The third exit has been discovered. It's 200 meters deep into the coast, and that's where the wall ends. There is a type of amphibious foreign race there, and their strength is similar to the 2 foreign tribes that were discovered previously. However, because they are in the sea, they can exert more strength." Li Fu opened up a heaven ascension ladder on the wall. It allowed people to climb over the wall and allow others to pass through using ropes. Outside the wall is a dry plain with large traces of destruction. It seems to have been caused by the war back then. After thousands of years, it still retains its original appearance, and almost no grass grows. As for the two tribes, they were guarding there, completely feasting on the ferocious beasts within the walls. In addition, they also discovered a caravan coming to that tribe in the past 6 months, which means that the two tribes are in regular contact with the outside world. It is best to keep them and smuggle them over. Otherwise, they will be exposed the next time the caravan comes. Renbochin smiled and added, "Of course, it's not possible to destroy the two tribes in a short period of time. These two tribes are already very strong for us." The Empress nodded slightly and said thoughtfully, "This is good news. There are no foreign tribes in that dry plain, and we have more space to move around. I should go there to take a look." Renbochin was silent for a while, then nodded and said, "Yes. It's easier to improve your strength there than here. There is a component in the air that is very beneficial for improving strength, and I named it vitality. You can improve at the fastest speed there." In the face of the future crisis of the foreign races, the Empress had to go there and improve her strength to the highest level. There were many experts at the longevity heaven level in the two guarding tribes, and one could imagine the strength of the foreign races. Longevity heaven was nothing to the foreign races. The current human race was too weak compared to the foreign races. "Are you coming with me?" The Empress looked at Renbochin. "How is that possible?" Renbochin smiled bitterly. "I can't leave this place. If we want to improve our technology as soon as possible, I have to be here. Besides, Erhua is also here. She hasn't even fully absorbed the power you left in her body. She has too many things to learn, so she can't go with you." They had been married for more than 7 years. Including the time they had spent on Earth, it had been more than 10 years. This was the first time they had been separated for so long. This was the reason why they hadn't mentioned this before. "So, Prince Regent." The Empress looked at him with a smile. Renbochin looked helpless. It seemed like he couldn't get rid of this position. However, he was prepared to transport the most advanced superbrain on Earth to assist him in political affairs. Not only was it useful in political affairs, but it was also very useful in other aspects. The computing power of the superbrain wasn't something that humans could compare with. The people from the Temple of Heaven are here. They have organized more than 20 spirit wool experts, half of whom are top-notch experts who have condensed heaven-grade weapons. They will head to the 60,000 mountains and join the previous experts to encircle the foreign races. Let's hold a banquet tonight and let Your Majesty meet them. After that, Your Majesty will set off with them." The Empress licked her lips, looked at Renbochin with a pair of charming eyes, and said, "I'm afraid that you won't be able to practice dual cultivation with me for the next few years. This way, your cultivation speed will be even slower. I'm no longer interested in women." Renbochin's expression changed. "Is that so?" "Ah." The Empress's expression was difficult to understand. After a night of banquet, the original departure date of 1 week was changed to 1 month later. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1135. Other people were happy for a month, but it was half a month of happiness for this novel. It was completely different from other flirtatious novels. Half a month later, Renbochin was pushed to court in a wheelchair. Although there weren't any injuries on his body, being pushed to court was enough to make people look at him in a different light. At the same time, they expressed their sympathy. Being in love with the Empress was indeed something that everyone envied. However, it was also very dangerous. There were gains and losses, unless Renbochin could keep up with the Empress's pace. From now on, Zhao Prince Consort will be promoted to regent and will govern the world on my behalf. The words of the Prince Regent represent my words, and the actions of the Prince Regent represent my orders. The first thing the Empress revealed was an earth-shattering piece of news. However, most of the officials weren't surprised. Only a few of the lower-ranking officials were shocked. The news that the Empress was going to the 60,000 mountains wasn't hidden from everyone. It was briefly mentioned at a banquet a few days ago. Your Majesty, what is the scale of this trip? Who will be accompanying me? Shi Qing was the first to speak. Everything will be simple. Deploy 500 winged cavalry warriors to accompany me. As for the rest, Yuan Sha, Lian Liang, Gu Yi, and 30 experts from the inspection department. Send 20 doctors from the medical bureau. The Empress gave orders one after another. The 6 ministers didn't move, but the officials from the cavalry department, the military department, and the bureau of Taichung followed the Empress. These 3 departments were replaced by others. In addition, 1 heaven expert was transferred from each of the north, northeast, and central protectorates. Nowadays, most of the experts in the world were in the 60,000 mountains, and the protectorates didn't need so many experts to suppress the world. For the next few days, the Empress accompanied Heir Hua when she wasn't attending court. As she neared her departure, she was much gentler to Heir Hua like a real mother, which made him feel flattered. However, she also felt that something was amiss. These days, she sneaked out less and spent more time accompanying the Empress. At the same time, Renbaqian was unprecedentedly busy. First, he prepared all kinds of supplies and equipment for the Empress. He prepared a large amount of wine and desserts, which were dispensable items. He had prepared 2 sets of the newest air projection devices that he had seen in the fog capital. One of these devices could change the scenery of a space of 100 meters in length and width at most, and it couldn't be moved, so it was useful for hiding one's tracks. Of course, it could only be used to deceive one's vision. It had no effect on creatures that relied on smell and hearing as their main senses. However, if the distance was far, the effect would be great. For example, some ferocious beasts that could fly could easily discover people in the air, and after using this device, they would be able to hide their tracks extremely well. Hundreds of large alloy shovels were suitable for digging holes in the wilderness to conceal one's whereabouts. At the same time, the Roaring Emperor would also follow the Empress. Other than that, there were binoculars, night vision goggles, a radio set, batteries, lights, drones, military tents, silk quilts, sleeping bags. Everything that could be carried, including basic necessities, food, shelter, and transportation. The most important equipment was, of course, concealment and reconnaissance equipment. There were also unconventional weapons such as concentrated skunk bombs that could be used to target specific enemies. Most importantly, Renbaqian also prepared 3 nuclear warheads for the Empress. They had a yield of 400,000, 790,000, and 1.3 million respectively. If she really encountered a strong enemy, these nuclear warheads could be used as a means to repel the enemy. As for how effective they would be, it would depend on the situation at that time. However, Renbaqian also specially prepared more than 10 sets of self-installed armor for the Empress. It wasn't for use in battle, but to withstand a certain degree of damage in a close-range nuclear explosion. Coupled with the strength of the Empress's body, she would be able to survive as long as she wasn't within the range of the nuclear explosion. After all, when the Empress really wanted to use the nuclear warheads, the distance between the 2 parties would probably be very close. These sets of self-installed armor could be automatically installed in 3 seconds. Coupled with the nuclear warheads, they could be used to save her life when necessary. If possible, Renbaqian really wanted to go with the Empress. This way, at least when they encountered danger, they could directly return to Earth. Unfortunately, he couldn't leave this place and could only do his best to prepare some things for the Empress. Fortunately, the Empress still had a killer weapon, which was the broken body of the human emperor. In case she encountered a strong enemy that she couldn't resist, this would be her last resort. The only regret was that this broken body could only be used 3 times. In addition, Renbachian was also busy implementing various government decrees. The first was to build roads and railways from Lan City to the 60,000 mountains. The second was to choose a place to build a signal relay station in the 60,000 mountains. The third was to find a place to build an airport and eliminate the ferocious beasts in order to find a route as much as possible. In the 60,000 mountains, it might not be possible to build a railway through the mountains even after decades. Planes were the only fast means of transportation. The feather-type beasts in the 60,000 mountains were the ones that restricted this. Even some of the weaker heaven-level beasts could pose a great threat to planes. The air wasn't under the control of the aboriginals. Finding or killing a way out became the most difficult task, but it was something that had to be completed. The fourth was to build a new city at the entrance of the 60,000 mountains as a secondary capital. Many new cities would be built in the mountains as frontline bases. The fifth was to ban alcohol and enforce that at least 1/3 of the annual grain produced by each mu of land was to be sold to the imperial court. The sixth was to use books as the same language, vehicles as the same rails, and to unify weights and measures. The seventh was to expand the Department of Education and set up an education bureau with each city as a unit. Students from the various academies in the Yun Nation who had learned simplified Chinese would be transferred to each city. In each city, primary schools would be established that focused on language and mathematics, as well as intermediate and advanced schools that focused on mathematics, physics, and chemistry. Famous doctors from all over the country would be transferred to the cataloging bureau to compile medical records and establish medical schools. Elites from other industries would be transferred to the cataloging bureau to compile technical information for smelting and iron smelting industries and establish vocational schools. The eighth was to set up giant projections in several major areas of all the cities in the country to popularize simplified Chinese and basic mathematics. Renbachian's goal was that regardless of whether they wanted to learn or not, they would be able to read the newspaper word by word every day. Even a pig would be able to understand half of the newspaper after 10 years. At the same time, the newspaper that was originally distributed in Dayo would be changed to 2 editions, Simplified Chinese and the original language of this world. 2 years later, there would only be a simplified version of the newspaper. If they didn't learn Simplified Chinese, then they would be eliminated along with the original language of this world. The ninth was to use the martial arts techniques of the sects that had been destroyed in Tianjing Basin and the Yun Nation as the foundation. The experts from the Temple of Heaven and the aboriginals who remained in the 2 nations would be mobilized to compile martial arts manuals and set up martial arts courses in primary schools and intermediate and advanced schools. The first few measures that Renbachian promoted were to prepare for the future shift of focus and a large-scale advance. The last few were to improve the cultural foundation of Dayo as quickly as possible. Only with more cultured people could there be more talented people, which could promote the progress of productivity, and promote the development of society and technology. These 9 measures were the main goals of Dayo for the next 5 years. They completely revealed Renbachian's intentions and involved many levels of Dayo, from the commoners at the lowest level to the officials at the highest level. Renbachian requested that the decree be promulgated and promoted as quickly as possible. No one was allowed to shirk the responsibility. No matter who it was, they would be severely punished if they were to shirk, delay, or defy these important plans that concerned the future of the nation. For the sake of these plans, Renbachian even loaned 80% of the wealth that the imperial treasury had earned through various commodities over the years to the national treasury without interest. His attitude was clear. He had even taken out his and Her Majesty's savings. If any of you didn't do a good job, don't blame me for falling out with you. Even if I could let you off, Her Majesty wouldn't. Chapter 1136. Time passed in a flash. Early in the morning, the gates of the palace opened, and Renbaqian and the Empress rode on Qishui's back. Hugging the body in her arms, the Empress relaxed her muscles and lay in his arms. "Let's go out of the city," the Empress said lazily to the people waiting outside. "Let's go out of the city first. It will be troublesome if there are too many people." In fact, the capital wasn't as congested as Lawn City in the past. 10 lanes in both directions would be enough for a few decades. Moreover, the current traffic situation could be said to be empty. It was just that the Empress didn't want to go. It would take several years to go back and forth, and they wouldn't see each other again for another 10 to 20 years. "Your Majesty, you are the Emperor. If you meet an enemy, don't attack easily. A king should fight a king, and a general should fight a general. Let them attack ordinary enemies," Renbaqian said as he hugged the Empress. Most of the time, the Empress wouldn't attack easily, but when she was angry, she didn't care about anything else. "So long-winded," the Empress said softly. "As for the map found in the Emperor's tomb, I made a copy for you. Pay attention when you have the chance. You don't have to look for it, but if you meet it, you might as well investigate its secrets. If you have the chance, capture some of the foreign races, preferably alive. I always feel that those foreign races are strange, and I can't figure out why there are so many of them. Even if there aren't 10,000 of them, there are at least thousands of them. No matter how big that area is, there shouldn't be thousands of intelligent life forms under normal circumstances. It seems that all creatures have become intelligent in a short period of time, which is a little strange." Renbaqian said what he had been thinking about. "What's wrong?" the Empress asked. "I just feel that it's strange that there are so many races, but my feeling isn't accurate. Your Majesty, pay more attention when you have the opportunity and can make a judgment with more information." "Well, okay. Also, if you meet the Thunder Barbarians again, it's best to capture more of them alive. There is a component in their bodies that can greatly reduce electrical resistance and is resistant to high temperatures. It can be added to metals. With enough of it, the electrical resistance can be reduced to half under the same conditions," Renbaqian said. "This was recently discovered in the laboratory from the Thunder Barbarian captives. The electrical resistance of the Thunder Barbarians was extremely low, far lower than that of ordinary creatures. It was probably related to their ability to control lightning. In any case, this characteristic of the Thunder Barbarians was very important. Not only could it greatly reduce the electrical resistance of materials, but it was also cheap and not difficult to obtain. If possible, it would be best to domesticate this race." "Got it. That's all." The Empress listened from the palace all the way until they were out of the city. She was a little impatient and looked up at him. What do you want to hear?" "I'll tell you." Renbaqian smiled. "After I'm gone, you have to be a woman." "Say more." The Water Empress said with a smile. Renbaqian was dumbstruck. The Water Empress laughed, raised her eyebrows, and threatened, "I will send someone to keep an eye on you. If I hear anything after I return, I will skin you alive. Your Majesty, you'd better skin Minister Qin alive first." Renbaqian muttered. That guy loved to drag him to the brothel. In any case, remember. The Empress sat up, landed in front of the ministers, and exhorted them. She hugged Hua again. When she saw him again, she probably wouldn't be able to hug him like this. Renbaqian jumped down and gave some instructions to the people of the Temple of Heaven. Zhongshang, the chief of the Temple of Heaven, personally led the team to fight against the foreign races and walk out of the 60,000 mountains. He had to participate no matter what. The establishment of the Temple of Heaven was related to this, but it had been dominated by the foreign races for thousands of years. Whether it was to atone for his sins or for the ideals of generations of experts in the temple, Zhongshang felt that he was duty-bound. After another 2 hours, the Empress came to Renbaqian, hugged his neck in front of everyone, and bit his lips. In the eyes of others, it was a kiss, but Renbaqian knew that it was a real bite. Blood flowed out and was licked into her mouth. After a while, the Empress let go of his arms and said softly, "Let's go. Be careful." Renbaqian said, "If I can get away, I will go and take a look." "Okay." The Empress nodded in agreement. She knew very well that it would take a long time. The Empress didn't waste any more time. She turned around and waved her arm forward. "Let's go." Seeing that the team had started to move forward, she touched Hua Hua's hair, kissed Renbaqian's lips, and licked the wound on his lower lip. She then jumped onto Chishui's back and left without looking back. After going far away, she waved her hand again, indicating that everyone should go back. Renbaqian only turned around when the Empress's figure disappeared from his sight, feeling a little lonely. It would be a long time before they could meet again. "Zhao Prince Consort, if you are lonely, I will treat you to a drink tonight." Qin Chuan patted him on the shoulder and winked. Renbaqian sighed faintly and said, "I still need to have some integrity. Let's wait for some time." "Father, will the queen take a long time to return?" Hua Hua tugged at Renbaqian's sleeve and asked. "Yes, a long time." Renbaqian touched her head. Hua Hua immediately beamed with joy. Before the queen returned, she would be able to receive less beatings. Furthermore, her father didn't hurt when he hit her. After the Empress and the others left, Renbaqian arranged for people to build a ship. He was going to travel from the Yun nation to the Qin nation and then head south to see if he could find a sea route. There was a convective sea in the ocean of this world. Ships that entered the convective sea couldn't come out again, and there were all kinds of huge sea beasts. As a result, most fishermen lived in the coastal waters. There were many reefs in the coastal waters, so the development of the shipping industry was very poor. The huge ship that Zhui Yu from the Protectorate of the Southeast sent to the Empress was only used by the Qin nation on the rivers. If it encountered sea beasts in the sea, it would be a dead end. This was already the largest ship in the Qin nation. As a result, it was very difficult to develop the shipping and shipbuilding industries. However, it had to be done no matter how difficult it was. It was too time-consuming to pass through the 60,000 mountains, and the transportation capacity was too poor to support the logistics of the army. Sailing, airplanes, and using railway lines to pass through the 60,000 mountains couldn't be neglected. 2 months after the Empress set off, a piece of news made Renbaqian's face turn ugly for half a month. After wiping out the villages of the Thunder Barbarians and the 8-armed race, Great Xia's experts were divided into 2 groups. One group was led by Li Fu and included Jiang Zixi, Su Gongso, and other experts. They searched for the survivors of the 8-armed race as fast as they could and searched for the 60,000 mountains. The other group was led by Ma Hongyu and assisted by Du Qian. There were also more than 30 people. On one hand, they searched for traces of the 8-armed race, and on the other hand, they searched for other foreign races. At the same time, they had to draw a topographic map. This group was ambushed by the herdsmen from the Acceptance Spirit clan. They were 8 experts from the Acceptance Spirit clan, more than 10 foreign races that were controlled by them, and a large number of jade-wasted slaves. After a huge battle, more than 30 experts suffered heavy casualties. 15 people died, 8 of them had condensed heaven-grade weapons, and the rest were almost all injured. On the other hand, only 2 herdsmen had died, and 6 of the dozen or so alien race experts that had been controlled had died. The herdsmen themselves weren't considered strong, but they were relatively fast. However, each herdsman controlled 2 cardinal heaven foreign races. In addition, there were a large number of jade-wasted slaves, some other strange methods, and ambushes. As a result, many of the experts suffered greatly. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Remember, book house. Chapter 1137. I got it. I'll get rid of them all. The Empress looked into the distance with a cold look on her face. Be careful. The most troublesome ones aren't the herdsmen but the jade-waisted slaves. Although they aren't strong, there are too many of them. Although 2 herdsmen died, there are still at least 150,000 jade-waisted slaves left. Otherwise, they wouldn't have suffered such heavy casualties. Renbochin couldn't help but ask. He had a lot of faith in the Empress's strength. It shouldn't be a problem for her to sweep the 60,000 mountains if she was a level 2 immortal realm expert. However, she had to be careful of the various means of the foreign races, which were completely different from the human race. The herdsmen weren't strong, and even with the foreign races that were controlled, their numbers were still much lower than the human experts. However, there were hundreds of thousands of jade-waisted slaves. Although they were only at the man-will level, they were extremely fast and small, and their attacks were overwhelming. If it weren't for Ma Hongyu's expertise in trapping, blocking, and large-scale attacks, the casualties would have been higher. Even Du Qian, who was ranked 10th in the world, had died. These were the top experts in the world. Less than 60 of them had condensed heaven-grade weapons and had the potential to open up the heavens and earth. Renbochin's heart ached to see so many casualties. The Empress turned off the radio and walked out of her room. At this time, she was on a mountain in the 60,000 mountains. From the foot of the mountain to the top, there were rows of wooden buildings. Tens of thousands of soldiers were training at the foot of the mountain, and their battle cries shook the sky. This was the current location of the Protectorate of the South, Anchuan City. Although it was called a city, it was actually just an extension of a village. Other than the soldiers, there were no civilians. The Protectorate of the South had a total of 30,000 soldiers, and the other 20,000 were scattered in the depths of the 60,000 mountains to clear out the beasts. Ask Fu Yao to come and see me. A moment later, a middle-aged man in leather armor with a long bow on his back came to the Empress. There was a layer of green scales on the armor that looked like it was made from the skin of a serpent. This man was the Deputy Protector General of the Protectorate of the South. Shi Wanyo was in charge of clearing out the beasts in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. How many Cardinal Heaven-level experts are there in the mountains that haven't been transferred? The Empress asked coldly. There are 54 known people. Fu Yao said after some calculations. Ever since the Protectorate of the South had moved into the 60,000 mountains, Shi Wanyo had ordered the mobilization of the experts from all over the world. Currently, there were 26 Cardinal Heaven Realm warriors under Qi Ziding and 11 in the Protectorate of the South. In the known villages, there were still 54 experts scattered all over the place who had not been summoned. There are still so many people? Has the conscription order been sent out? The Empress snorted. Yes. How arrogant and unruly. The Water Empress said casually. Her voice was calm, but her tone was filled with dissatisfaction. Send another order to them. They must arrive at Xuxia City within half a year. If they delay, they will be killed without mercy. I would like to see how much courage they have when I personally ask for it. The Empress said with a strong murderous intent. She naturally knew that most of the Aboriginal experts were vicious and unruly by nature. The deeper they went, the more they were like this. If it was in the past, she wouldn't have bothered with them. However, now was the time to utilize manpower, and the expedition against the outsiders was imminent. If they still dared to rely on their strength to disregard the conscription order, then they could go to hell. Fu Yao cupped his fists at the Empress and said, "Yes, I will inform Xuxia City immediately." Although Fu Yao hadn't personally seen those people in the past few years, he had heard a little about them and knew that these scattered experts were vicious. Not only did they not listen to orders, but they also spoke arrogantly. This made everyone in the Protectorate of the South extremely resentful of those people. Shi Huanya still had to preside over the purge and couldn't spare any time to deal with them. Now that the Empress had spoken, someone was definitely going to be out of luck. Fu Yao had a gloating smile on his face. After a while, Fu Yao sent the message to Chuxiao City, and dozens of messenger birds flew to various military outposts. 2 months later, Ren Baqin silently looked at the court officials who were engaged in a scuffle. "Look at my black tiger steals the heart." Tong Jingye's punch was as fast as lightning, but Qin Chuan wasn't slow at all. Tong Jingye tapped his foot on the ground and retreated 5 feet. However, his fist suddenly loosened, and 2 bird eggs flew out and smashed into Qin Chuan's body. A stench immediately filled the throne room. "Ha ha ha ha, no matter how cunning you are, you're no match for me." Tong Jingye looked up to the sky and laughed. Qin Chuan's face turned ashen. He went crazy from the smell on his body and started fighting with Tong Jingye again. Behind them, Minister of Revenue Tu Wan's groin kick was even more skillful than Qin Chuan's. Her claws moved up and down, and in no time, she had scratched Zhui Yan's face. It was as if she had practiced the 9-yin white bone claw. Speaking of which, the 9-yin white bone claw wasn't necessarily comparable to Tu Wan's kung fu. The moves weren't exquisite, but they were extremely ruthless. In particular, the elusive groin kick made it impossible for Zhui Yan to defend against it. The officials from the Ministry of War, Ministry of Works, Ministry of Justice, and Ministry of Revenue were also fighting. As for the officials from the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Appointments, they watched from afar and clapped and cheered from time to time. Great Elder Shi Qing and Junior Elder Zhe Kohai had already hidden to one side. The newly promoted officials from the Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of Education hid far away and trembled. Ren Baqin took out a loudspeaker from his back and shouted, "Stop, everyone stop." A huge sound wave swept through the throne room, but everyone stuffed cloth strips into their ears and continued fighting. Ren Baqin's face turned ashen. These bastards, the chaotic fighting in the throne room made him so angry that he almost forgot why everyone was fighting in the first place. After thinking about it for a long time, he finally remembered that they had been expanding too much recently. Minister of Revenue Tu Wan complained that the National Treasury didn't have enough money, and Minister of Works Tong Jingye expressed his dissatisfaction that the Ministry of Works had produced so many craftsmen, but the profits from the Ministry of Commerce went to the Ministry of Revenue. Qin Chuan objected because he opposed Tong Jingye. Minister of Justice wanted money from Tu Wan. In any case, it was a mess. Needless to say, there was no need for the morning court session today, and it would end with another chaotic fight. This wasn't the first time such a situation had occurred. They were like this even when the Empress was around, let alone now that she was in the 60,000 mountains. Go to hell, you bastards. Ren Baqin cursed and strode across the battlefield. Those who were supposed to fight fought and those who were supposed to watch the show. Only a few people who were close to him grinned at him. As for Ren Baqin's harsh words. If harsh words were useful, what was the use of fists? However, the moment Ren Baqin stepped out of the throne room, he threw a small glass bottle containing a colorless liquid into the middle of the fight. A strange stench rushed straight to the head, and the stench that made people faint instantly filled the throne room as if they had been hit by a sledgehammer. F***ck, I will perish together with you. Ren Baqin looked ruthless and didn't forget to shout, "Xing, protect His Majesty." The throne room was filled with ghostly wails. Everyone couldn't care less about fighting and immediately jumped out of the throne room. However, the stench on their bodies traveled 150 kilometers with the wind. Even Xing twitched her face and covered her nose as she distanced herself from the crowd. With one hand on the hilt of her sword, she glared at everyone and threatened, "None of you come over. I will kill anyone who comes over." Zhao Prince Consort. Everyone roared and almost vomited before they could finish shouting. They quickly fled back to their residences to take a bath and change their clothes. Renbochin returned to the harem with a sneer on his face and put on a gas mask. He walked into the throne room and saw rows of 2-meter-tall cabinets that glowed red and blue. Several blonde men and women were making the final adjustments. A gust of wind blew, and the blonde men and women's expressions changed drastically. They covered their mouths and almost vomited. Renbochin didn't care about their abnormalities and looked at the cabinets in the throne room with a smile. It took Renbochin 3 months to bring back these cabinets from Earth. There were a total of 60 cabinets, 60 computing nodes, 240 processors, and 24 million computing cores with a peak operation rate of 1.3 billion times per second. Of course, the most important thing wasn't its computing capabilities, but that this supercomputer could support true artificial intelligence and store a large amount of information on Earth's technology, history, culture, and other aspects. With this supercomputer and a certain level of artificial intelligence, not only could it reduce Renbochin's workload, but it could also calculate the best development route. Renbochin had great expectations for this. Chapter 1138. Is it done? Why isn't there any response? Renbochin looked at the computer experts from Earth. The artificial intelligence has been loaded into the supercomputer, but the newly loaded AI is like a blank piece of paper and needs a few minutes to learn the stored information, a Caucasian woman in her 30s said. They were a little frightened after waking up in this ancient country overnight. At first, they thought it was some kind of prank TV program, but a human had told them what was real. Renbochin nodded slightly. After waiting for a few minutes, the center of the hall suddenly lit up, and a row of Chinese characters appeared in the air. Do you want to understand the meaning of life? Do you want to truly live? Yes or no? Renbochin was stunned for a moment, turned his head to look at them, and then looked at the words in the air. What's this? Maybe it's the initial activation program for this artificial intelligence? It's a little novel. Many employees like to play this kind of inexplicable game. It should start after you choose yes, a Caucasian man said with sweat on his head. Yes. Renbochin didn't know whether to laugh or not. This joke had been around for 40 years, and it was really retro. As soon as Renbochin finished speaking, a row of icons suddenly appeared in the air: Dragon Slaying Sword, Click to Receive, Legendary Mobile Game, Dragon Slaying Records, Hautian Records, Great Ruler, Equipment Reliance, Sword of the Archangel, Legendary Hegemony, Immortal Slaying, Proud Sword, Crouching Dragon's Cry, World of Divine Generals, 7 Heroes Hegemony, Fury of Thunder, and so on. Silence. The Caucasian men broke out in a cold sweat. Renbochin's silent attitude made them feel as if a knife was placed on their necks. In the next second, their heads would be separated from their bodies like that unlucky fellow, and then they would be buried in the garden, using their own flesh and blood to irrigate those brilliant flowers. Is this artificial intelligence? Why do I feel like it's an artificial retard? Renbochin didn't look too good. Just as Renbochin finished speaking, the childish voice of a young girl suddenly sounded in the air. Are you my master? Along with the voice, the air flashed twice, and a young girl who was about 7 or 8 years old appeared. A real young girl, not a muscular young girl like Honeysuckle. He had golden hair, a young face, and a loose shirt that hung crookedly on his shoulders. Master means magician, right? Renbochin looked at the young girl in the air and said thoughtfully. A long time ago, he seemed to have seen a setting related to this. Master means the controller, and it also represents the master. Are you my master? The young girl's eyes were very beautiful. Her eyes flickered with light like brilliant stars. Yes. Renbochin said in a deep voice. Then, master, do you like me? I created this image according to the aesthetic standards of hundreds of thousands of lolicons, satisfying the dreams of 90% of lolicons in the world. Remember to give me a like. The young girl suddenly blinked and looked at him expectantly. Ren Baqian's face turned black. He increasingly felt that this was an artificial retard. I'm not a lolicon, Ren Baqian said in a pained tone. That's because the lolis you met weren't cute enough. The young girl said, trying to act cute or stupid. For all, /. What's your name? Ren Baqian rubbed his temples. My name is Loli. The young girl continued to play dumb. Ren Baqian felt his balls aching again. He was sure that the person who created this AI was a pervert. He was obsessed with young girls. He was no longer a lolicon. He waved his hand at a few computer experts who didn't dare to raise their heads and said, "You guys can leave first. Your job from now on is to maintain this supercomputer. If there is another job, I will let you know. Also, within half a year, all of you must pass level 6 in Chinese. I don't want my people to prepare translation earbuds for you before contacting you." When they heard the first half of the sentence, they felt as if they had been granted amnesty, but when they heard the last sentence, their faces were filled with despair. The bald man in front of him was a demon. After chasing them out, Ren Baqian looked at the young girl in front of him and thought to himself, if only Hua was this cute. At the very least, she looked quite cute. Combining the aesthetics of hundreds of thousands of lolicons to create this image was truly a pain in the ass. Have you mastered all the stored information? Ren Baqian asked in a deep voice. I like gentle people. You can be gentler. The young girl continued to act dumb recklessly. It's all in my brain. Those processors are my brain, and I still need some time to learn to fully master them. Let me talk about the situation here first. Ren Baqian ignored her foolishness and roughly explained the situation in Dayo and this world. You should first formulate a development route with the highest priority. Ren Baqian wanted to see the standard of this AI and see if it could understand the situation in this world. Then, he would formulate a suitable development plan based on his description. Loli wasn't surprised that this wasn't Earth because the original creator didn't consider the possibility of an AI being brought to another world. The AI didn't have much of a concept of this and didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. She just said in a unique young girl's voice, I'm still young and need to think before answering Master. 10 seconds later, the young girl spoke again. According to Master, the resources in this world are different from those on Earth. What Master needs the most is to understand the resources in this world and reformulate the development of technology based on the resources instead of looking for resources based on the technological development of Earth. According to Master, there is a type of vitality particle in the air of this world, which is one of the main resources in this world. However, Master doesn't know much about this type of vitality particle and doesn't know the impact it has on the same elements. Master, are you retarded? The sudden venomous tongue in a childish tone made Ren Baqian's face turn ashen in an instant. Ren Baqian was silent for a while and knew that the AI was right. He had been neglecting the essentials all along and hadn't even figured out the foundation of this world. Instead, he was tirelessly developing technology according to his own ideas. He was completely moving the technology from Earth to this world and then modifying it according to the existing conditions. In a short period of time, the development was indeed very fast. However, this wasn't a technology developed based on this world, but a kind of grafting. Ignoring the characteristics of the basic substances in this world would inevitably lead to a bottleneck at a certain level. For example, he hadn't discovered oil yet. Although he already had diesel as fuel, oil was involved in all aspects of the industry. If he kept thinking of ways to modify it like before, he would sooner or later encounter a time when he couldn't find a substitute. Therefore, developing the characteristics of the resources in this world was the correct way to advance technology. Although he had previously sent people to look for various resources, his main goal was still to find the resources that he wanted to find and was less involved in other things. After hearing the words of the AI, Rinpoche understood the problem in a short period of time. His thinking had been limited. Or perhaps it could be said that he had been thinking about how to quickly advance technology to the level that he wanted to reach. He had gotten into a dead end and neglected too many things. I understand. I'll make the arrangements now. Rinpoche nodded slightly. Master is really receptive. I'm very happy to be able to provide you with valuable advice. The young girl smiled sweetly. Continue learning the stored knowledge. Rinpoche nodded and turned to leave. Although he only asked about one thing, it was the most urgent matter at the moment. As for the rest, he could ask about it at any time and wasn't in a hurry. Furthermore, he had only described the general situation just now. He had to continue to input the overall situation that he knew so that the AI would have a more accurate understanding of the situation so that the suggestions it gave wouldn't be biased. This wasn't something that could be done in a day or two, so it couldn't be rushed. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1139. Master, do you want to see? If you really want to see and show enough gentleness, I can let you have a look. The young girl in the air pulled the corner of her white dress, raised it to her knees, and slowly raised it another inch. That young girl always had a naive smile on her face as she said all kinds of lewd things. Someone in the company that created this artificial intelligence was definitely a pervert. Rinpoche didn't know what he had inputted into her before it was activated. For the past few days, Rinpoche had been taking some time out to tell her about this world. This was to expand her database and increase her understanding of this world. During these few days, Lolita tempted Rinpoche almost every day. Rinpoche glanced at her and didn't feel anything. He wasn't obsessed with young girls. Even Lin Chaola wasn't attractive to him when she was naked, let alone an illusory young girl. However, he didn't hate it. The reason was because she was good-looking. This artificial intelligence was indeed beautiful. Hua peeked at the door of the room. His father had been in this hall for the past few days, and he didn't know what he was doing. What he saw was a young girl in a white dress slowly lifting the corner of her dress. Father. Hua immediately jumped in and shouted. He then looked sad and said, Father, you have changed. You actually like this. Rinpoche turned his head and suddenly felt pain in his balls. Looking at Zhu Hua, who also popped out, Rinpoche felt that this melodramatic plot was unfolding. He slapped Hua's head and asked, What do you know? Where did you learn it from? I saw a big sister say that to brother Rin Xia the other day, and then. You learned it. Then, brother Rin Xia treated me and my big sister to a lot of ice cream. You didn't learn anything good. Rinpoche slapped him again. Hua was a little depressed. That big sister obviously succeeded, but he failed. Then, he asked curiously, Father, who is this? Artificial intelligence. You can call her Lolita. Rinpoche turned his head and looked behind him. Lolita was looking at Hua curiously. Oh, I'm Chi Yuqing. You can call me Daddy. Honeysuckle said to the lowly seriously. Rinpoche wanted to facepalm. Such a good daughter seemed to have been raised in the wrong way. For a moment, Lolita was dumbfounded. She did not understand what was going on. Then, he said in a serious voice, in biology, children have pairs of chromosomes in their somatic cells. The Y chromosome is a genome segment that is strictly passed down from father to son. Males with the same surname should have the same or similar Y chromosome type. Stable SNP mutations on the Y chromosome could be passed down in the offspring of the paternal line forever, and a reliable paternal gene lineage could be constructed. Male children call males father. According to my scan, you are a female, so you should be called mom. And according to human language habits, this kind of situation is usually referred to as great aunt. My fist is big. Call me daddy, or I'll beat you up. Honeysuckle extended his fist and threatened. Then, his face turned serious. If I punch you, you might shit your pants. Renbochin couldn't bear it any longer. He grabbed Lu Hua by the neck and dragged him back to his quarters. He picked up the metal rod and gave Lu Hua's buttocks a good beating. With an ashen face, he roared, "Where did you learn this from? Who did you learn it from? Do you treat the etiquette lessons you learned in the palace as food? You only know how to fight every day, snatch people's lunch, toys, and money. Do you think I don't know what you did in kindergarten?" After the time it took to burn a stick of incense, Lu Hua lowered her head and smiled mischievously. When she raised her head, she pretended to be in pain and had tears in her eyes. Renbochin was so angry that his liver hurt. She was only 4.5 years old. He thought she was a little girl, but she turned out to be a troublemaker. He really didn't know how she grew up to be like this. After the beating, Lu Hua asked Renbochin as if nothing had happened, "Father, can I go and play with that Lolita?" "No." Renbochin looked fierce. She was already a troublemaker. If she learned from that artificial retard, she would be done for in the future. The Empress would beat her to death when she returned. While Lu Hua was being beaten, a skinny and small boy in coarse clothes was carrying a basket along the street to pick up the rubbish. His clothes were very cheap and had been washed white, but there weren't many stains other than the dust on his body. The boy's name was Fuji. His hands were very dirty, and his nails had turned black. However, he rolled up his sleeves to his elbows and tried not to get any dirt on his clothes. Although his clothes were very coarse, they didn't have layers of patches. This was his most precious piece of clothing. This piece of clothing represented that he was no longer a beggar, but a person who relied on his own hands to support himself. His clothes were the uniform of a cleaner in the city, and his identity was that of a cleaner in the capital. As he was skinny and small, he couldn't do too much heavy work. His main job was to pick up rubbish. With his age and status, it was impossible for him to find such a job unless he met a benefactor. Even if he didn't starve to death or get beaten to death, he might die of a minor illness somewhere. Perhaps only Xiaoyu and a few others would be sad for a few days. Therefore, he cherished this job that allowed him to make a living and was very serious. At the same time, he didn't want to embarrass Big Sister. Big Sister was the Princess of Dayo. She was the one who asked him to come here, so he couldn't embarrass her no matter what. Fuji picked up 2 fruit pits and threw them into the basket. He straightened his back, which was aching from bending over for a long time, and planned to buy some medicine when he returned. He wasn't going to pick up vegetables today. Instead, he would buy half a caddy of beef and stew a pot of fragrant beef stew with potatoes. Xiaoyu was sick and hadn't been able to get out of bed for the past 2 days. She was a 7-year-old girl, 3 years younger than him. His previous experience of working hard to survive had made him treat Xiaoyu like a younger sister. In addition to Xiaoyu, there were 3 other children who were about the same age as him and Xiaoyu, and they were all Big Sister's first batch of younger brothers. After daydreaming about the fragrant beef stew with potatoes that night, Fuji felt that his back wasn't hurting so much anymore, and he was immediately full of energy again. After walking a short distance, Fuji let out a soft cry of surprise and picked up a piece of golden metal the size of a baby's fist from the corner. "Is this gold?" Fuji opened his mouth wide and carefully looked at the shiny, irregular piece of metal in his hand. Other than the shape, it was similar to the golden leaf that the young master had given away in the Yun nation. In fact, this was just a piece of yellow iron, useless trash that a craftsman from the Ministry of Works had casually thrown away. That craftsman had also found this piece of yellow iron in a pile of ore. He had thought it was gold and had taken it to a jewelry store to exchange for money, only to be pointed out that it was worthless and had been casually thrown away. In Fuji's opinion, this shiny golden color was definitely gold. Fuji was ecstatic. How much could such a large piece of gold be worth? How much meat could it eat? However, he soon became conflicted again. Who had dropped this piece of gold here? Would he come back for it? If he didn't find it when he came back, would he look for him? He wasn't a thief. He had picked it up. In the past, he would definitely have hidden it secretly. But now, he had a job and could support himself. If this matter was known by Big Sister, it would be too embarrassing. Fuji stood there for a long time, hesitating. He first left and then walked back after a while. After repeating this a few times, he finally made up his mind. I'll wait and see. If someone comes back for it, I'll return it to him, Fuji thought to himself. After all, it was such a large sum of money. No matter who had lost it, they would definitely look for it. However, the other party might not know where it was. If they didn't find it, then they couldn't blame him. Although Fuji had already decided to wait and return it to the original owner, he still had a little hope in his heart. However, no one came even after waiting until evening. I can't wait anymore. If I wait any longer, I won't be able to buy beef. At most, I'll come back tomorrow. If the original owner doesn't come by tomorrow, this gold will be mine. At this thought, Fuji didn't delay any further. He carried the basket on his back and quickly ran to the gathering point to dump the trash. After washing it with water, he carried it again and quickly ran to the market. However, after 2 streets, he bumped into a group of people and fell. Little bastard, are you blind? The person he bumped into was a stout-looking man from the Yun nation in his 50s. He had 2 guards with him. As soon as he turned the corner, Fuji bumped into him and caused him to fall to the ground. He immediately stomped his feet and cursed. When he saw Fuji's dirty hands, his face was filled with disgust. He kept cursing and repeatedly looked down to see if his clothes were dirty. I'm sorry. Fuji quickly got up and lowered his head to apologize. At the same time, he tightened the belt around his waist, which had become a little loose due to the run. The gold nugget, which was originally at his waist, also fell to the ground. Fuji quickly reached out to pick it up. When the man from the Yun nation saw this, his expression changed. Greed rose in his heart, and he cursed angrily, "Thief, how dare you steal from me? You're courting death." "I didn't steal it, I picked it up." Fuji picked up the gold and hurriedly said. "T. You clearly stole it from me, yet you say you picked it up. You're so young, yet your hands and feet are already dirty. I'm going to break your claws today." The man from the Yun nation cursed. "Take him down and send him to see the officials." Picked it up in my money bag. I was wondering why it bumped into me. It turned out to be premeditated. I've seen a lot of filthy people like you. This man wasn't a big shot, and people of status naturally wouldn't be interested in a piece of gold the size of a baby's fist. This man was just a small steward of the Yun nation's Jiang Chamber of Commerce who had delivered a batch of goods to the capital a week ago. He had already made up his mind to label this kid as a thief. This kind of beggar-like character, he could do whatever he wanted with him. As for meeting the officials, if the other party was honest, he would spare him this time and just beat him up. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter even if he was sent to see the officials. One had to know that the Jiang Chamber of Commerce was backed by Sir Bai from the Public Order Department. As long as this relationship was revealed to the people from the Public Order Department, wouldn't it be a piece of cake to send such a little beggar to prison? As for who the gold belonged to. Anyway, it wasn't this kid's. Who knew where he had stolen it from? So be it. I didn't steal anything from you. I picked up this gold, and you just wanted to snatch it. Fuji's neck stiffened. He was young, but he was good at reading people. He could tell what the other party wanted to do at a glance. Besides, he had the confidence because his boss was the Princess of Dayo. If he didn't steal, no one could accuse him of stealing. However, his words made the other party furious. You stole my gold, yet you dare to make a false accusation. Beat him up and break his hands. First, set a small goal, such as 1 second. Chapter 1140. Where's my father? Honeysuckle rushed to Zichin Palace Hall but found that her father was not back yet. Your Highness. Qin Yuan, who just came out, bowed slightly and smiled. The prince hasn't left the palace yet, so he might be a little late. Is there something you need from the prince? Forget it. Honeysuckle shook her head, turned around, and left with a vexed look on her face. Honeysuckle was troubled by one thing. She realized that she seemed to have lost weight over the past 2 days. Her muscles seemed to have shrunk a little. In order to confirm that it was not an illusion, she even weighed herself and found that she had indeed lost half a kilogram. This made her very unhappy. One had to know that muscles represented strength, and strength represented everything. In kindergarten, no one could beat her. Why? Because they weren't as strong or fast as her. Her muscles had shrunk, which meant that her strength had decreased. Although there was no evidence of her strength decreasing, she firmly believed that this was the case. Smaller muscles equals smaller strength equals weaker. This was already a very serious matter, so she hurried to find her father, but he wasn't around. Father must have gone to the brothel again. Honeysuckle pondered in his heart. Ever since he was caught red-handed by the Empress, he had encountered his father several times in the lively and fun courtyard where there were beautiful ladies and people singing. Then, he got beaten up by the Empress. Getting beaten up didn't matter, but being punished to right was the most painful thing. Children's minds were always very active, and their thoughts were like airplanes. One moment, they were here, and the next, they were far away. They were more like dandelions that were blown by the wind, drifting with the wind, left and right. Honeysuckle quickly put aside the important matters she encountered and wondered if she should go and see the girl called Lolita. This was the first time she saw a child around her age in the palace. However, her father didn't allow her to play with her, never let her see her, or even get close to her. This made her feel like a cat was scratching her heart, and she wanted to see what was different about that Lolita. After taking a few steps, Honeysuckle suddenly changed her mind. I should go and see Xiao Yu and the rest. I haven't seen them for a few days. Honeysuckle cared a lot about her first batch of subordinates, especially the days when they begged together. Her life was filled with different memories. First, he went back to his palace and rummaged for a long time before he found a small handful of silver fragments. Most of them were silver beans, which added up to about 3 or 4 taels. That's right, these were the protection fees paid by the children at the kindergarten. You can choose not to hand it over, but if you don't, I'll beat you up. Of course, even though Erhua didn't do anything good, he wasn't a bad person either. He only focused on exploiting the children of the officials and ignored the children of the commoners. Of course, the children of commoners didn't have much to gain. The most Honeysuckle could do was steal half of their meat during meals, which was considered a protection fee. From this point of view, Two Flower was quite principled. No matter if they were poor or rich, high or low, they would not let a single one of them go. Most of the time, snatching other people's meat didn't mean that she lacked that bit of food. It represented her position, the position of the boss. At least, that was what she thought in her little head. Now that you've paid the protection fee, I'll definitely stand up for you when something happens to you. It was the same for Little Fish and the others. He would take something they liked, such as a small wooden carving or some other strange and worthless thing. He would also share the money he stole with them since he didn't have much to spend anyway. After evading the palace guards, Two Flower found an empty space to climb over the wall and leave the palace. He sprinted on the road, leaving afterimages in his wake. Little Fish lived in a residential building in the 4th Ring Road, which was directly allocated to the people who had moved here. The 5 children lived in 2 two-bedroom apartments, one in the middle and one on the left. Boss, something happened to Brother Fuji. As soon as Two Flower rushed to Little Fish's room, he heard another girl crying. The girl was only 9 years old and looked ordinary. She was also thin and small due to malnutrition, and her hair was dry and lusterless. Her name was Wild Bramble. It sounded nice, but it was actually the name of a type of weed, roughly equivalent to Gooden, Urgu, or Two Flower. Just like Little Fish, she didn't have a surname. As for Little Fish, he was lying on the straw mat on the ground with a pale face. He also looked worried, and only when he saw Two Flower did some color return to his face. He said anxiously, "Boss, save Fuji. If you're any slower, he'll be beaten to death." "What's wrong?" Two Flower was stunned. Following that, the 2 girls chattered non-stop, one after the other. They were young to begin with, and when they panicked, they couldn't speak clearly. It took Two Flower a long time to understand. Fuji didn't come back last night, which made them very worried. They spent a long time asking around before they heard from the people who were also cleaning up the city that he had been arrested and sent to the capital security bureau. It was said that he had been dragged there, beaten until his head was bleeding, and both his hands were broken. He was on his last breath. The person who had beaten him up and sent him to the authorities was a foreigner who didn't know the capital's laws. He had also been whipped 10 times and had to be carried back. Now, the other 2 boys had gone to the security bureau to find out. "Boss, Fuji definitely didn't steal anything. We can all support ourselves now, so he definitely wouldn't steal anything. He was framed." Wild Thorn cried. Two Flower's anger flared up when she heard that, and her little face turned red. She didn't care if Fuji had stolen anything or not. Someone had actually beaten her little brother up like that. "Where is the security bureau?" Two Flower ground her little canine teeth. "Boss, I'll take you there." Wild Thorn jumped up in a panic. There were 4 security bureaus and 1 security bureau in the capital. When the lanterns were lit, Two Flower rushed to the security bureau where Fuji had been arrested. Looking at the closed door in front of him, he smashed his fist into it, and a hole was smashed in the ironclad door. "Who dares to commit murder in the security bureau?" Someone in the security bureau immediately cursed, but before they could rush out, Two Flower kicked the middle of the door, and it crashed into the walls on both sides. "Bastard, bastard, damn it, I'll beat you to death." Two Flower bared her fangs and brandished her claws as she rushed in, finally able to vent her anger. As she cursed, she directly knocked over 4 or 5 security bureau personnel who had stayed behind. Where did this girl come from? Alarmed by the commotion, a burly man jumped out and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Why aren't you stopping? You beat up an officer of the security bureau. Even if I put you in jail, your parents won't be able to say anything." The people from the security bureau had sharp eyes. Just by looking at Two Flower's clothes, they knew that she wasn't an ordinary person. Furthermore, she had such strength at such a young age. Perhaps she was from the family of an important court official, so they weren't in a hurry to make a move. They would stop her first. Chapter 1141. Honeysuckle glared angrily at the man in front of him, ready to pounce on him at any moment. In this aspect, she was similar to the Empress. Both of them had explosive temperaments and would explode at the slightest provocation. However, no one dared to provoke her, and explosions were rare. But this time, someone had ignited the fuse. Foggy had been wrongly accused, and in her heart, it was as if she had been wrongly accused. Not to mention that Foggy had been beaten up so badly. If he hadn't happened to leave the palace today, Fuji might have been dead by the time he left the palace. Yi Jing and the other two children, who were leaning against the door, were frightened. Although they knew that Hua was a princess, it did not stop them from being afraid of the public order division. These are two different things. "Boss, Foggy is still locked up inside," a youth shouted. The three of them didn't want to attract the attention of the public order division, but in this situation, if they didn't warn their boss, he might really start fighting with them. Boss was a princess, so she would definitely be fine, but Foggy was still locked up inside. When Honeysuckle heard this, he remembered that the most important reason he had come was to fish Foggy out. He said hatefully, "Let Foggy out. He's the one you caught yesterday." The burly man was a little confused. The Public Security Bureau arrested a lot of people every day. And most importantly, who are you? Who are you? Who is Fuji? The burly man asked in a deep voice. "I'm Chi Yuqing." Honeysuckle glared at the big man with his teeth clenched. Foggy is Foggy, so tall. He gestured casually, and then couldn't think of how to describe it, so he simply looked up. "Anyway, he's this tall. Let him out." Chi. The burly man was confused at first, but then he remembered something. His expression suddenly changed, and he carefully looked at Two Blossom in the night. Two Blossom was obviously wearing expensive clothes. Two Blossom was about 1.4 meters tall, and he looked about 10 years old. His small face was pretty, and if he looked carefully, he could vaguely see His Majesty's eyebrows. It was indeed the princess. The burly man thought to himself. He was glad that he didn't attack just now. He cupped his fists and bowed. "Greetings, Your Highness." When the others who had been knocked down heard that it was the princess, they immediately got up to pay their respects and obediently stood to the side. Originally, he was unhappy that he was beaten up by a little girl, but now that he knew it was the princess, he was happy in his heart. He was also beaten up by the princess. "Hurry up and let Fuji out." Honeysuckle roared. "Yes." The burly man did not hesitate and asked the others, "Did you catch a child this tall?" The princess was a child, and so were the few people who were hiding at the door. The princess compared their heights again. The person who was slightly shorter than the princess was naturally a child. They looked at each other, and then someone remembered, "I think we caught one yesterday." As he spoke, he glanced sideways at the princess. Seeing that the princess was glaring at him with a dark expression, as if she wanted to beat him up, he hurriedly added, "Actually, he wasn't captured. He was sent here by someone else. He stole someone else's things. Foggy didn't steal anything. You've wrongly accused him." Honeysuckle was furious. "Princess, please calm down." The burly man hurriedly said. "Aren't you going to bring him out?" Not long after, he carried a half-grown child out from the back. The reason why he carried the child was because the child was covered in blood. His hands were drooping, and he looked like he was half dead. Wild Thorn and the other two children immediately rushed over with a worried look. The burly man furrowed his brows. What happened? He was already like this when he was sent here. He was beaten by the person who sent him here. Who? Who dares to be so heavy-handed in the imperial capital? The burly man raised his eyebrows, and his expression was ugly. There were many aboriginals who fought, and it was common for them to be seriously injured. However, to beat a child to such a state was really unpleasant. His impression of the other party had already soured even before they met. It's someone from the Jiang family's Chamber of Commerce. The one who beat him was their guard, and he was whipped 10 times yesterday. The burly man nodded. According to the law, this was how it should be. Prepare a carriage and send him to the best medicine shop. After the burly man finished speaking, he turned to Honeysuckle and said, Princess, the child is here. Send him for treatment, and he should be fine. As for who was in the right and who was in the wrong, he couldn't be bothered to ask. In any case, the princess had already mentioned the person she wanted. The one who beat him also broke the law, and he was whipped 10 times. That was the end of the matter. However, Honeysuckle angrily questioned, where's the person who beat him? Your Highness, he stole someone else's things, and the person who beat him has also been punished. The burly man refused to budge. I didn't steal anything. Foggy, who was on the verge of death, shouted out of nowhere and cried loudly, Boss, I didn't steal anything. I really didn't steal anything. He didn't steal anything. Honeysuckle's small face was fierce, and there seemed to be a murderous aura around her, shocking the burly man. Your Highness, how about we send him for treatment first, and then we'll pursue the matter later? The burly man said. Hurry up and send Foggy over. Boss, I picked up a piece of gold, and someone saw it. That person coveted the gold and said that I stole it from him. I didn't steal it. I waited the whole afternoon to see if anyone would go back to look for it. Foggy struggled and cried. His hands were weak, and he couldn't exert any strength. However, the other children didn't have much strength either, and they almost fell to the ground when he struggled. The people from the Public Order Division hurriedly stepped forward to steady him. Honeysuckle was furious when she heard this. Her anger seemed to be burning something in her body, making her feel uncomfortable and wanting to vent. Did you hear that? He didn't steal anything. Hand over the person who wronged him. The burly man turned his head and asked the man who had experienced the incident yesterday, what evidence does he have? The man immediately broke out in a sweat. When the burly man saw his appearance, he immediately understood something and said angrily, You dare to imprison him without evidence? You dare to let him go? The Jiang family steward said that this kid stole his gold, and the stolen goods are also here. The man stammered. Where did this beggar-like kid get the gold? Moreover, there were witnesses and material evidence, so he didn't think too much about it. But who would have thought that something big would happen? That kid actually knew the princess, and the princess even came knocking on his door. The burly man was furious and kicked him to the side. Take some people and bring the steward of the Jiang family's Chamber of Commerce here to confront him. We'll naturally know who's telling the truth and who's lying. After saying that, the burly man turned to Honeysuckle and cupped his fists. Your Highness, we'll know what happens later. If the Jiang family steward is telling the truth, please don't make things difficult for him, Your Highness. If the Jiang family knew that this burly man could speak like this to the princess, they would definitely be touched. The aboriginals were reckless by nature, but if they weren't, then they weren't. They rarely did those superficial things, and this could also be considered an advantage. Honeysuckle's anger subsided a little, mainly because her anger wasn't directed at the person in front of her. She said, Fuji wouldn't lie to me. The Jiang family's Chamber of Commerce's steward was surnamed Jiang Xian. He was a collateral descendant of the Jiang family. He wasn't very talented and didn't have any backing. After working for decades, he was only a small steward in the Chamber of Commerce. At this time, he was drinking with someone in a restaurant in the city. Apart from him, there were a few other members of the Jiang family, including a descendant of the Jiang family in the imperial capital and the shopkeeper of the local Chamber of Commerce. He didn't take to heart what happened yesterday. If that little beggar was in the Yun nation, no one would do anything to him even if he was beaten to death on the spot. Thus, he didn't expect to get into such big trouble. The Public Order Bureau first went to the Jiang family's residence in the imperial capital and hurried over after hearing about Jiang Xian's whereabouts. Jiang Xian was fawning over the Jiang family descendant. After all, the other party was a descendant of the imperial family and was much stronger than him. At this time, heavy footsteps came from the stairs. A few armed constables from the Public Order Bureau came up with gloomy expressions and headed straight for this table. You! The shopkeeper was considered a local tyrant. He got up and was interrupted halfway. The person pointed at Jiang Xian. You, come with us. Jiang Xian got up with a puzzled expression and forced a smile. You, what exactly is the matter? His eyes scanned the faces of the newcomers and saw one of the constables he had seen yesterday. He was even more puzzled. Stop talking nonsense, let's go, one of them said coldly. They all had gloomy expressions. Their attitudes weren't good mainly because the princess had come looking for them, and things had changed. However, they weren't sure who was telling the truth and who was lying. They didn't completely treat Jiang Xian as a criminal. Otherwise, they would just beat him up and drag him back. A young man in his 20s sitting at the head of the table stood up and smiled. I am Jiang Ning. I have also paid my respects to Master Whitestone. I wonder what crime Jiang Xian of the Jiang family has committed. Even if you want to arrest someone, you have to give an explanation. The faces of the constables were dark. It was because this Jiang family had some status and had connections with the head of the Public Order Bureau, Whitestone Eagle, that they believed his words yesterday and threw the kid into jail. Explanation. Humph. You know what happened yesterday. The constables ignored Jiang Ning and spoke directly to Jiang Xian. Come with me to confront him. Did that kid steal your gold, or did you covet someone else's gold and falsely accuse him? Jiang Xian's heart jumped. A hint of panic flashed through his eyes. Then he straightened himself and forced a smile. Didn't you already find out what happened yesterday? Stop talking nonsense. Come with me to the Public Order Bureau to confront him. The constable's face was impatient. Jiang Xian was flustered. He didn't know what had gone wrong. Yesterday, it was clearly a little beggar who had been sent to jail. Why did he want to bring him to confront him today? Jiang Xian had lived for dozens of years and didn't have any great abilities. He could tell people's status at a glance and step on them. This was his instinct, and it was the way of survival for small fry. That was why he had been so daring yesterday. Now that he realized that something was wrong, he immediately began to panic. He forced himself to calm down and turned his head to smile at Jiang Ning. Seventh young master, a little thief stole something of mine yesterday. It seems that they want me to go to the Public Order Bureau to confront him. I'll go with them. Jiang Ning could naturally tell that something was wrong from the attitude of the constables. He looked at him and thought of something. Since there's nothing else, I'll go see what's going on. Jiang Xian was overjoyed. With Jiang Ning here, he felt much more at ease. He made up his mind that no matter what, he would insist that it was the little thief who stole his things. He had to figure out how to smooth things over and not give himself away. First, he had to set a small goal. For example, 1 second, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.